We welcome you here today. My name is Miriam Fischer. I am the director of Konrad-Adenauer-Stiftung in Malaysia. A warm welcome and also a big thank you to all of you for joining us this Sunday morning as we hold our next webinar in our series on social market economy perspectives for Malaysia. Today's title, Are Universities Worth It? So that means today's focus will be on the question of how the Malaysian tertiary, TVET, and also the higher education system could be reformed to better face the future. When we actually started developing the idea for today's webinar, we thought of calling it, Are we failing our students? But since actually some of our speakers today are university professors, we thought this might scare their students and we decided to go a different way. But really, that is the point of today's session. The question, are we failing our students? Because it comes with a big responsibility. The responsibility for not failing them and the responsibility of shaping Malaysia's educational system in a way that equips students well for their access to Malaysia's future job market. And I am pleased to have such an amazing panel of experts with us this morning, and they will share different angles of this field. And I thank you all for making the time to be here this morning, for being so interested in this topic, and for sharing your views with us. The webinar is designed to be as interactive as possible, so we are very happy to read your questions and answers in the chat box. Please post them short, and we will hope to give your questions to the speakers as well for maximum audience interaction. So once again, welcome to all of you, and thank you very much for being here. I wish us all a very interesting discussion and a very lively debate. Thank you so much. And with that, I hand over to the moderator of our first panel, which is Dr. Edmund Terence Gomez, a long-standing professor at University Malaya until his well-deserved retirement just last week. Dear Terence, the screen is yours. Terence, will you unmute yourself, please?
Thank you, Miriam, and welcome to everyone to this session. I'm glad to see so many of you here today on a Sunday morning. The reason we are having this discussion here, as Miriam said, is to look at the current state of the education system in this country. And there are two things we want to look at. One is tertiary education at the level of the universities, and the other is the technical education through the TVET system. So today on this panel to discuss these two issues, we have with us, and it's quite a privilege to have them here. On the issue of the future of TVET in Malaysia, we have Yang Muhammad Nurul Iza Anwar, the Member of Parliament for Pematang Pau. And to discuss the issue on the future of work in Malaysia, we have Professor Jeffrey Williams from the Malaysian University of Science and Technology and Associate Professor Dr. Paulo Casadio from Help University. Now, before we start, let me say a few words about the session and why we planned the session this way. We have been talking about TVET for quite some time, how to mount it in a way in which we can provide skills, technical skills to people who are not possibly equipped to go and do tertiary education at the university level. Having said that, there is without a doubt technical skills are very important, and we need a technically trained workforce. We are not paying this technical workforce the wage commensurate with the skills that they have acquired. We have looked at this also in comparison with Germany, where in Germany, those who are technically trained are very highly regarded in society. And that's why there's a need to talk about how we can reshape the way we think about technical education, especially to inform the young that this is a very highly valued profession to get into. The second issue, which we've been talking about for quite some time, is the state of education. We have had to deal with this problem of institutional decline. And what do I mean by institutional decline? There's no doubt that the universities, the public universities in particular, have been subjected to a lot of criticisms in terms of the quality of education we offer our students. There's been much criticism about the quality of graduates to the point that unemployment among graduates in this country is very high. How is that even possible? that our graduates from our top universities, as well as the other universities, find it so difficult to get jobs? What is wrong with the kind of education that we are providing our students? This is why Miriam's question, are we failing our students, is very crucial. This is something we have to grapple with. But as we were discussing all these issues, we were suddenly confronted with the COVID. The COVID pandemic hit us in such a way that we suddenly realized we had to work quickly to deal with these problems. Why do I say that? A third issue, which we were discussing before the COVID pandemic hit us, was about the digitalization of the economy, the need to create a digital economy. We were talking about e-learning and e-teaching. We were talking about the digital economy, the age of digitalization, and where does TVET fit in to all this? When the COVID pandemic hit us, we had to move quickly to implement mechanisms to improve education using forms of digitalization. Are we equipped to do it? And while we were discussing all this, there was also the issue of the future of work. If anything, the COVID pandemic clearly brought to the fore that the way we work in the future is going to change. So we are now fast forward, if you like, into issues that we have been discussing for a long time. Now we cannot just discuss. We have to act. We have to implement. We have to bring about these changes, and we have to equip the TVET level education system as well as the university level education system to the digital economy. This is the best way to train our students given the crisis that we are now confronted with. How do we deal with this crisis? How do we digitalize the education system? How do we link digitalization and TVET coherently? These are questions that we are going to pose to our panel speakers. Now, the way we're going to run this panel is this. I will pose questions to the speakers. It's going to be an interactive form. I will also allow the speakers to interact with each other. If you have any questions, please include them. Please write them in your chat, in the chat box, and I will pose your questions to the speakers. Please keep your questions short. We don't have time. I don't have time to read long questions. If you have an opinion, please give us an opinion too, and I will also convey opinions to the speakers. So with that, let me now begin the forum. I will start by posing the first question to Jeff. Jeff, the issue on everybody's mind is this. What exactly do we mean when we say the future of work? What does that mean in real, concrete, tangible terms? Jeff?
Well, good morning. Good morning, Terence. Good morning to everybody. This idea of the future of work is, I think, something that people like to talk about it, but I think people don't quite have a precise understanding of or a precise picture about it. Basically, what we're talking about when we're thinking about the future of work is how are people going to earn a living in the future? That's it. When we're thinking about the future, do we mean now? Now is the future, or the foreseeable future in, let's say, the next 5 years, or do we mean the future in terms of the next decades and so on? So we need to try to understand the timing of this. What does it mean in terms of the urgency of these ideas about future of work? Of course, we know that during the COVID crisis, a lot of people have experienced disruption in their normal day-to-day working patterns, and people have had to pivot to new forms and new types of work. And the question arises: will that be the new normal in terms of work, or will it be something else? Now, we also have to try to think about whether work in the future is actually any different to work in the past. The narrative around future of work is, of course, that it's all going to change. The narrative around future of work is that we face these various disruptions, principally disruptions which come from technology. And people often use the term fourth industrial revolution as a catch-all term for types of technology that are going to affect the workplace. But I think what we really need to understand is that this is more of a futurist narrative, a consultancy narrative. It's not really an economics narrative. The evidence about many of the claims related to the future of work is actually quite shallow, certainly in terms of the empirical evidence. And also from an economics perspective, our behavioral theories and our understanding of how people actually engage in the workplace also are not particularly supportive of there being very, very significant changes for the mass population. What we are likely to see is various forms of technological change affecting smaller groups. And often these are groups of people that involve us. For example, in education, of course, we understand that the use of online learning, for example, has forced on us changes in the way that we deal with education, both in schools and in universities. And that has had an effect on the way that our work will, or is being done now and will be done in the future. One of the big issues with the new wave of technologies is that it will affect professionals very much more than non-professional tasks, actually. The type of technologies that are being introduced very often will automate routine or straightforward or replicable tasks. And that means that, contrary to what many people might think, it will be professions such as accountancy or the legal profession, or even the medical profession, which will be affected by these forms of technology. And this is rather different to how we have seen it in the past. And so that has a sort of hollowing out effect, because we will see professions which are quite well-paid professions, where many of the tasks will be automated away. And then there will be a question as to what will we do if we are in those types of professions. So, for example, as professional academicians, if we are putting all of our material into online audiovisual content and allowing the students to access it 24/7, and then we're removing face-to-face classes, we're removing lectures, the question for us as academics will be, what will we do? What will our role be? And do we have a real proper vision of that? If we look, for example, in accountancy, we know that the switch to e-commerce, for example, means that transactions are now electronic. So you remove the need for really quite important accounting functions that have been a big part of what accountants have done in the past. For example, bookkeeping. Auditing doesn't need to be done by people anymore, because it can be done through electronic records and blockchain certification of financial transactions, for example. So the question will arise, what will people in the accountancy profession do? And what will their role be, for example? And then that, of course, in terms of higher education, which is really what we're trying to focus on today, or tertiary education, what we're trying to focus on today, it raises the question of what will we teach in our universities? Because at the moment, the very subjects where we are concentrating a lot of time and effort, particularly in the non-science areas, where we spend a great deal of time and effort in teaching accountancy, in teaching management, in teaching lawyers, in teaching people in business and management related areas. Actually, these are exactly the type of things that will be automated away, and that are actively being automated away. And in fact, the COVID process, the COVID crisis, has in a way been a catalyst to make that happen much more quickly. Whereas in the past, we might have felt that these sort of changes might take place over 5 or 10 years, or even 20 years. Actually, we've seen that happen in the space of 20 months in many instances. And the question will be whether that will continue to happen, or whether we will switch back. So there are very many issues, and what's important in terms of our understanding of these things is how then do we design proper responses in terms of technical and vocational education. And part of the mistake in the narrative that we often hear is that we should focus on science, and we should focus on technology, and we should focus on STEM, science, technology, engineering, mathematics. So we should focus on all of those scientific, technical types of activities, and that we should pivot toward that as an industry, as a higher education community. When in fact the evidence shows that, and Paolo will discuss this in great detail later on, but the evidence shows that actually the demand in the future for jobs, the demand for skills, the demand for various types of tasks will be demands that resist the technology, not demands that will be removed or automated or taken away by the technology. And in fact, the main areas where we should be focusing our attention are not in fact in technology and science and that type of innovation and development. Clearly, we need to spend some time on that, but we mustn't overemphasize it, because the greatest weight of demand will be in social sciences, social activity, personal activity, activities that resist automation. And for us as academics, these mean the type of things that we are perhaps much more confident about, much more interested in: critical analytical thought, creativity, active listening, active engagement, active debate, active discussion, social activities, and more practically, because we will also be facing not just a technological megatrend, but also a demographic megatrend, things that will address the demands of an increasingly older population, where we will, for example, need to have much more social care, much more social protection, much more social interaction, much more education of younger people, much more ways of looking after older people. And these are often the areas that we are not concentrating on at the moment. So,
Jeff, I'd like to step in here to pursue one point that you've made. Now that we have an understanding of the meaning of future of work and the way we work is going to change, and we have talked about the issue of, I'd like to bring up the issue of the gig economy, the growing automation that we see in the economy.
yes.
The point I would like to get to you is, since we are situating this discussion in the context of tertiary education, are our universities ready to train our students the way you have just described the future of work? Are we equipped to do it?
Well, the short answer is no, of course. And the reason for that is that it's not our job. That's the truth of it. I mean, I've said it before and I'll say it again. Most academics have never had a job outside of a university. And therefore, coming to a university to expect academics to train people for the world of work, which is changing and changing and changing and changing in ways that we actually are not familiar with, and we don't even understand the trends of these things, we are actually not the right people to ask to deliver that type of training. But when it comes to the type of issues which will be very important, as I mentioned before, critical analytical thought, creativity, engagement with that change, not, the analogy I often use is a phone, right? This is my phone. Everybody has a phone. My job is not to know how to make the phone, or even to fix the phone, or to make an app on the phone. As an academic, as an economist, my job is to know how to use it in order to do my work. And I can tell you that my phone is the most important thing that has improved my productivity, because I can write an article for a newspaper on my phone and have it published within 2 hours. So but the phone is just helping to speed up that process. But the creativity that goes behind the creation of the article and then the getting it published quickly and understanding what is necessary to publish it quickly, that is the type of thing that we are good at teaching in universities, not necessarily the technology, how to create the technology.
But then
that means that that role has to go somewhere else. And increasingly, Terence, it will not be with universities. Increasingly, it will be actually with technology companies, with technology firms. People are much more likely to go to Google in order to do a certificate on creating an app, than they are to come to a university in order to get an academic to teach them a certificate how to create an app. And it will be better. It will be a better quality training and learning experience, and it will be properly credentialized, and it will be much more useful in the marketplace in terms of their human capital.
But my question really, Jeff, is this. Technology will affect the way we work. Are we equipping our students with that kind of skills to know how to use technology to fit into this modern economy where the future of work, as you put it, is changing so significantly?
Okay. Well, that is something we can do, but the question is, are we doing that? And I feel that, well, of course, it very much depends upon the individual academic. What happens in your class is wholly under your jurisdiction. But of course, we all know as academics that we are increasingly restricted in terms of the freedom of what we can teach in our classroom, how we can teach in our classroom, the extent to which we can teach our students to be critical, the extent to which we can teach our students to engage in a discussion which is constructive and positive and not confrontational, but then to understand that you can have a contrary opinion without being offensive to somebody else, and then that contrary opinion is the grist to the process of coming up with a new and better idea. And I think, unfortunately, over the 18 years that I've been working here in Malaysia, it is the case that there is significant restriction on our freedoms as academics to be able to teach freely in our own classroom, particularly if we're trying to encourage a process of critical analytical thought and critical analytical engagement in the material. And sometimes even the choice of the material itself is not available to us because it's considered sensitive or it's not a topic we can discuss. So that type of thing does restrict what we can achieve as academics. And then that in itself has an effect on the question of whether we are teaching people the type of skills that they will need in the future economy and in the future work.
Thank you, Jeff. At this point, I'd like to bring in Paulo because Paulo has been doing a lot of work in this area. Paulo, the discussion has been on technology, but I'd like to pose this question to you. We know, according to Moore's law, technology changes very quickly. Practically every 18 months, we have new technologies, and technologies which are very relevant today may not be relevant in the very near future. So the question then to you is this: with all these changes in technology occurring, how does this affect the market? How does it affect also our students in terms of how they respond to the changes in the market, as well as to economic growth? Paulo?
Right, thanks. It's very interesting to analyze not only the microeconomic effect of the substitution of machines, of substitution of work with machines, but also macroeconomic level, at macroeconomic level, because actually there will be a complete change in the picture at world market and the growth around the world from what we know now. And if we focus about competitiveness and we watch quickly, very, very shortly, what happened in the last 30, 40 years, but especially in the last 20 years, when China entered in the WTO. The globalization of trade and the interaction among economies gave relevance to the concept of competitiveness in terms of price competitiveness. The low labor cost and the low price of the manufactured mainly shifted completely a huge amount of income from the developed countries to the developing countries, and especially Asia. Of course, we have in mind China, but also other countries like Thailand, Indonesia, Malaysia. So it's very interesting that we got a lot of growth and a lot of penetration in advanced market thanks to this price competition. But of course, the price competition is something that belongs to the past. Because now, watching forward with the new technology, or even the concept of competitiveness change. the competitiveness 4.0 is not only based on price. Actually, price becomes very marginal because technology minimizes the contribution of work, and so the advantage in terms of cheaper work cost becomes really relative. Instead, it's much more important to have goods and services with high technology features, with high quality, highly reliable, and this is all linked to a different idea of competition based on quality. And so, if the low salary belongs to our past, the pendulum of this distribution of income is going back, according to our analysis, to the developing market, because we have less competitive advantage in terms of cost, and you rely more on traditional technologies. So what I want to wrap up is this, that in the last 20, 30 years was quite easy from Asian economies to grow and to penetrate in a developing market. But thanks to this more complex and more sophisticated technology, the market will be much more complex and much more competitive, so much more difficult. And if we don't train and prepare our workforce and our students to this new challenge, they will be in troubles in this new environment. So looking forward, should ask us to give additional instrument, additional knowledge, and additional view to our students to be competitive in a new market. This is what I want to stress.
Hello, I want to push you further on this point. Are the students and the university aligned properly with the future of work the way you have described it? Now, let me give you some points which I'd like to bring up here. If you look at, you said about the way the shift is now occurring to the emerging economies, and I agree with that. Look at the rise of China and how China is emerging as the top economy in the world. But I'd like to come back to another point which I want to stress. We are encouraging our students to become more entrepreneurial. I have a problem with that. But what I do agree with is that we're encouraging our students also to be creative, to be innovative. And the way the future of work is changing is now we are creating small companies, what they call unicorns. Unicorns are very small companies led by very creative people who create a demand in the market which works very well. So, for example, we have Shopee, Lazada, for example. These are unicorns. In Indonesia, we have major unicorns: Gojek, Tokopedia, Traveloka, Bukalapak. These are unicorns which serve particular sectors of the economy. And I'm wondering to myself, if Indonesia can do so well, Singapore can do so well. Singapore has, as I said, C, which helped create Lazada, and they have Shopee there too. They have Grab, which has also gone to Singapore. These economies have managed to develop unicorns. The education system seems to have provided the skills for students to create these small companies that fit into the future of work. What is wrong with our education system that doesn't seem to allow us to do this? Where have we gone wrong?
Okay, I would distinguish two types of problems. Unicorn are very, very rare examples. So if we talk about the system, I would focus on the system, not talking about unicorn. And actually, unicorn, as you mentioned, we had the Grab. I say we as a Malaysian. We had Grab. At the point that we couldn't retain Grab in Malaysia because Grab moved out, and this is another problem that we don't talk now. But at systemic level, the focus would be this: our students and the families of the students, in taking decisions about the study and the perspective, they look backward. Traditionally, we watch the type of job that is solid, is prestigious, is traditionally gives you a career, a good salary. So as Jeffrey was mentioning before, a lawyer, an accountant, a doctor, physician, and so on. So this is the way that in a stable picture of the economy, we do. We watch what is a good benchmark, good model, and we try to put our investment, that is education, in this direction. Unfortunately, and in these pictures, the university serve the demand, just follow the students. So allocate the resources and the best professor where there is the peak of demand. So this is the picture as it was before. Now, with this disruption coming from technology, thanks to the Industrial Revolution 4.0, looking backward or looking forward are completely different. So there is a mismatch, and this is the table I suggest you to quickly analyze. We have completely a different understanding. If you watch outside, backward, and this table tells us that in Malaysia, people kept looking backward in deciding the type of study to start. And looking forward, watching what are the estimates of the expert, there's a gap. So our students are queuing, are grouping, are distributing, accumulating on these red type of studies here that are basic programs, engineering, manufacturing, social businesses, social studies, business law, and so on. So 62% of our students, in which the expert tell is very unlikely that we can add some additional work, or it's very likely that the work will shrink. Instead, 1/3 more or less of this work, which are the green, in which all the experts of the future work telling you, look, this is the direction you have to take. This sector is shrinking. You can see here, more or less we have -1%, so quite stable, sure increase in demand in the future. The stable is shrinking. The science, mathematics, and computing is -5 in terms of concentration of our students. When is balanced, so it's more or less the outlook should be like the present one. And there is accumulation, and actually high concentration. 62% of our students are accumulating, and recently in the last years increased by 9% in something that is very likely to shrink in the future. So this is a mismatch that the future work poses us. University at this moment are lagging, are following the students. I think a new role of the university, not only at institution of university institution, but of the system of education, government, public opinion, has to watch, put an eye on the future and try to give some information, some direction, in order to have not only backward-looking decision, but also decision that will be that produce good results in the future. So this is, I think, a good point. And looking to the next discussion, I think we will have to think not only to the TVET, but maybe TVET 4.0. When we have this 4.0, we mean including all the elements and all the disruption coming from the Industrial Revolution, from this completely disruptive and new technology.
Thank you, Paolo. That's a good point now for me to bring in YB Nurul Izzah. Izzah, you've heard the discussion that we've been having so far. The question that is now coming up is this. We know, first, if you could tell the audience a bit more of TVET and how it's evolved in Malaysia. But I'd like to also ask you to link this to the discussion we are having now on the issue of the future of work and the growing automation that we see in the economy and the use of, say, artificial intelligence. How does all this gel with the way TVET has been evolving in Malaysia? Izzah?
Assalamu alaikum and a very good morning to everyone. Thank you, Dr. Edmund, Mrs. Miriam, as well as the two speakers, Prof. Jeffrey and Dr. Paolo. I think I was really struck with what was mentioned by Prof. Jeffrey, because there is clearly a bias, right? There's clearly a bias here existing in terms of how stakeholders view education. Even the topic of today, it's skewed towards graduates from universities more than the focal point of the fate that's suffered by many TVET students and of course the graduates themselves. I feel that when you talk about the findings, we also look at what's been presented worldwide. There's a recent McKinsey consultancy survey. They looked at about 18,000 respondents across 15 countries. And the conclusion among many was that the lower skilled jobs are the ones being hollowed out after the pandemic, as a result of the pandemic. So you're going to look at jobs that need far more qualifications, more higher tech. Of course, there's also other soft skills, in embedded within. But it just showcases, who are we actually speaking of when we talk about the need to prioritize certain segments during this pandemic, when everybody knows and understands the unequal nature, how even in the gig economy, these are frontline economy workers who are not certainly enjoying the perks of day-to-day experience. So it brings back again to future-proof jobs, to make sure that we are preparing our students for the necessary requirements, facing them. It's quite uncertain. We don't know the number of variants or future pandemics that will come our way. So it brings home the need to have a lifelong environment, right? Lifelong learning environment, affordable upskilling. And this is the role of government. This is the role of lawmakers to introduce laws and necessary enablers to provide for such an environment, not just the educational segment alone. Yeah. So I feel that when you talk about TVET, I was previously the chair of the Empowerment Committee. I mean, that it really breaks my heart, because you hear all these stats, but in actual fact, on the ground, almost everything was closed. They can't continue their classes. It's a bit different from online courses. There was a recent study by a local university looking at the major challenge faced by TVET institutions in Malaysia, and that is the fact that they didn't have the full capabilities to organize online or e-learning. They don't have that. So most of them are shut down, and these students, really need very face-to-face engagement, skill sets that require them to be in situ, in that particular area of learning. And because of this, I was initially quite happy when 4 months ago, the then Prime Minister announced the formation of a TVET National Council to be spearheaded by the Ministry of Higher Education as well as Ministry of Human Resources at the Saravanan. But again, after numerous committees that were announced, including the rebranding of TVET, because in a post-pandemic world, people need to see direction. Where do we plug in our human capital? Where will they be kind of pushed towards? What kind of areas, industry, whether it's healthcare, from the paper that Paulo showcased just now, whether it's about wanting more engineers such as myself, which is not very helpful during this particular hour of need. So you need to have that kind of key push along, but there hasn't been any updates thus far. So I would bring back as a conclusion, because there's going to be biases. Consultancies will push for higher skilled job, whereas we need to focus on the creation of better social safety nets. We have to focus on the lower skilled segment. How will they survive? How will they make a meaningful living out of this rubble of the pandemic, especially in the social economic crisis and the impact? So I will conclude by humbly suggesting, again, the bill that's required, introduced in Parliament, to coalesce and combine all the existing courses in a fully fledged, overarching council looking at not just TVET. I think Paulo mentioned just now, it's not just TVET now. We can no longer separate those in the academic world, because that's how it is in Malaysia. There's always sometimes this clear-cut detachment from the students in the TVET segment versus those who went to university. There has to be a very, sort of seamless integration, and looking at how the TVET programs, which are arranged across 7 ministries, some of which perhaps lack quality, clearly, would have to follow and abide by one rule, where accreditation, it doesn't matter which ministry is helming it, but if your program doesn't meet the necessary benchmark, you have to either close down or you have to be replaced. So I think this overarching council, which I suggested in the bill, is something that we can look at. I mean, certainly it's far from perfect. We now need to plug in the latest updates, the latest challenges with regards to how behind our students have fallen. You know, I will be very unfair to say it's not just my kids, but all the children who are going to be behind in terms of their reading skills, their social skills, and this would translate onto how they perform at the tertiary level. So all these things should really bring us to monitor and look at the data rather than just, announce here and there 6 billion ringgit budget for 6 billion ringgit for 2021, for TVET. Those things I think is no longer relevant. I mean, our relevance is just in terms of how we utilize the data accordingly and how we are able to implement systematic reforms at this juncture. It can no longer be piecemeal. I think whatever findings that was unearthed today, it has to be coalesced in a bigger framework. And this is where, whether it's HRDF or any other government agencies, they cannot work in silos. I think it's just that's the way I look at it. So in terms of the updates, everyone here knows about the weaknesses of TVET. I mean, I don't think I need to repeat. They are in the industry. We have even those who have been well-versed in the German experience trying to integrate with Malaysia's needs to plug in more higher skill and skill sets for our workforce. So it's more like, what do we do with this knowledge?
Thank you, Nurul. I want to take this a bit further because you stressed a lot about the government's role and the government intervening and playing the role of being an enabler. But in the TVET system, and I'm glad you brought up the German model, the German system for TVET, for example, is that you become an apprentice with a firm. You spend 70% of your time with the company learning a skill and 30% of time getting the more theoretical skills. So that 70% is the practical skills, a transfer of knowledge, if you like, practical knowledge. What that means is companies now have to play a big role in implementing TVET properly. And I think this is important also because if you look at the corporate sector, 98% of the corporate sector are SMEs. And I like my students to go and work with actual masters who will train these students well. So we create a well-qualified, well-skilled group of people trained by the best in the industry. And we have enough SMEs in this country to do that. What's your response in terms of the role of the private sector, the role of firms in the TVET?
I completely agree with you, Dr. Enman. I think it's important. I'm not asking the government to intervene. God knows we have enough government-operated TVET institutions. There's so many at the more than 1,000 programs. And clearly, the thing is, the government should spearhead that kind of direction in terms of when you talk, maybe it's not a good example to say it in Malaysia because it hasn't come up with kind of positive results thus far. Yeah? but I think that the bigger issue is when you talk about the implementation of this bill, we wanted to have an industry skills education training commission, of which is independent of ministerial involvement or influence or even interruption. And this is crucial because when you have TVET institutions or colleges placed under the purview of a particular ministry, it becomes a political patronage. It becomes an extension of the minister, right? It lacks or it loses the ability to be mindful or responsible towards its key stakeholders, which are the students. So for me, when you talk about the students, how do we enable their social mobility, their career progression? It is true, as you rightly pointed out, the 70%, hands-on practical training, which there's already pockets of success. The point is, why are we not extrapolating? Why are we not adding on and sort of changing the system based on these key successes? I feel that the majority of which is still reliant on the archaic models of how things were being done rather than fully being absorbed under the human resources. I think the SLDR training, they wanted to emulate the German model, yeah. And additionally, our TVET levels have not reached to the point of, do you have a master's in welding? So we do need to, that's where the role of government is. You do need to amend and introduce necessary changes to make sure you move according to a mobility clear-cut progression for the graduates. If not, we're still stuck in the old mode of thinking, on the old mode of doing things.
Well, we have a lot of questions, which are actually going to build on the point you just made, Isa, but let me pose it to all the panel members. And this question has now come up repeatedly. How should universities make themselves relevant? How do we bridge this gap between universities and the business sector? This is important. This is an important question because we talk about industry-university linkages, whether it's in the university or whether it's on the TVET. Is that working? And that is a problem. It is not working properly today. So institutionally, how do we bring about these linkages between the universities and the TVET institutions and the private sector? Who would like to go first? Jeff, can we start with you and then I'll go on to...
Yes, I used, in a previous incarnation, I was the deputy chairman of the EU Chamber of Commerce. And I was also the chairman of the Education Committee in the EU Chamber of Commerce. And we were actively trying to create these industry-university links. And we found it incredibly difficult to do, because the universities were unfamiliar and uncertain about what they wanted from the industry players. Basically, they want money, is what they want. In the end, the bottom line is they want the industry players to fund something for them, fund a research project, fund some scholarships, fund some students. And the industry players were basically saying, no, that's your job. And what we want from you is for you to send us so-called industry-ready graduates. But then when you ask the question, what does it mean to be an industry-ready graduate? They often wanted us to train for specific skills that they needed in their specific company. And then we would say, well, look, we can possibly do that. We can only possibly train for general skills. It's the best we can. I couldn't possibly know what you need specifically in your company. And so it always became very, very difficult to match the expectations of the universities with the expectations of people in the industrial sector. And so in the end, it was always a default, let the government do it. And then the question is, who in the government? Is it MOHI, is it the Human Resources Ministry, or then we find out that 7 ministries have responsibility for TVET in different areas. And then it was a default to the government. And then the government would come back and say, well, look, we can provide a framework, we can provide resources, we can provide whatever it is, but you are the guys who need to talk to each other and find out what specifically you need and what specifically you can offer both sides. Now, as Terence mentioned, that's exactly what the German system aims to do, and to a great extent, that's where the success of the German dual vocational system arises, because the specific training isn't provided by the universities, right? The specific training is provided by the company for 70% of the time, and then for the balance of the time, the general training is provided by the university. And that's done in a co-curriculum. There is involvement with both sides in terms of development of the curriculum. But here in Malaysia, for example, when they had these various industry degree programs, I think there's one called a 2+2, 2 years in industry, 2 years in university. The whole philosophy of that was, you come to university for 2 years, then you go to the industry for 2 years. You don't do it at the same time. And this is antithetical, actually, to the underlying success of a model like the German system. The idea is that you do this at the same time, because we have been looking at this, Terence and I and some of the other people in the team, Aslam and so on, for a long time with KAS. Going back to 2009, we actually went to Germany to look at how they run these types of schemes. And what we found was, it isn't just the skills training or the learning that's important, it's actually also the socialization. Often we hear from employers that our graduates come out and and they're not ready for the world of work. They don't understand basic things about turning up on time, how you interact in a working environment, the hierarchy of the boss. And whereas we found in Germany that they would say, because they come here and they're involved in a working environment almost straight away after school, they develop social skills and interactive skills and a greater maturity and an aptitude for the working environment. And that's the type of thing that it's very difficult for us to give in a university setting. And that's why we have to deal with this in a collaborative environment, which involves the universities and the colleges, the businesses themselves, and of course, the government. And I think that that's not the discussion that we have here in Malaysia, even in the TVET framework. In the discussion we have is, we will do this in the universities, then you will do that in the industry, and then we will do this in the government, and it's a disaster. In fact, we looked in the 10th Malaysia Plan is where we started our work on this. You remember, Terence, back in 2010. And actually, the first thing we said there was that the 10th Malaysia Plan was planning to create 66% of the new jobs which wouldn't require university or tertiary education. That was the plan, and it was only 10 years ago. And in that regard, it has been completely successful, because the jobs that are being created don't require university education. And that's the big problem in terms of policy involved.
Nurul, you put up your hand. Yeah. I'm sure you want to respond to the things that Jeff has said.
No, absolutely, because this is why it's so crucial to address the key problem. It's so fragmented. You know, when industries come or different players come overseas, they will say, which ministry do we go to? How do we basically, you know, get access to the kind of workers that we need to fulfill, you know, the future of the company, whatever vision. So having this is where the government should come in, I believe. You know, you understand your key weakness. People are confused, not just students. I mean, different collaborative frameworks are taking place and meetings go on and on without an end in sight. So whether you have the brilliant German model or even the Singapore model, in each of these countries, because we've looked at it, including the UK, there's a clear-cut agency go-to, right? They monitor the quality, they accredit, they take disciplinary actions if need be, but there's one clear-cut framework of authority. So similarly in Malaysia, you know, we do need one clear-cut authority. If you have co-chairs, there will be a tussle, trust me, between the Ministry of Human Resources and the Ministry of Higher Education. I mean, been there, done that. So for me, it's just crucial to have, you know, first clear-cut form of governance. Is, you know, people understand what to expect. Even industries, you can't fulfill all of their needs or demands, even the private sector, but you say this is how the rules are applied equally to everybody. So the quality of the programs, I feel, is the golden geese, because if you have superb quality, then it's something that will be able to produce the, you know, the needed workforce. But we still need to address the elephant in the room, which is this fragmentation. Even, I mean, I just told you, Dr. Edmund, you know, from the announcement made, I don't know how many committees were set up. So I believe the pandemic should really serve as a wake-up lesson, you know, wake-up call. Like, you need to just implement this hard-hitting move, which means taking the power from many of these ministries. They will never have control anymore over their institutions. But, you know, for me, it's not a money-making program. It is actually, you're producing future for Malaysians. They need kind of assurances that these programs lead to something. So the shift has to move away from how you make money from this initiative, but really how you actually produce the workforce that you need. So I mean, I think we can have many suggestions, but for as long as the system is in place, you're going to face the similar, you know, challenges. You know, the JPK, and at this point, JPK is under Ministry of Human Resources. They're the ones that come up with the accreditation and the curriculum. So imagine it's deeply embedded under a ministry. So their source of authority will not be able to overcome that of a Minister of Defense. You know, they also have their own TVET institutions and other bits. So the power dynamic in any organization, in any country for that matter, matters because it will impact the flow and the outcome of any initiative that we make.
Thank you, Nurul. I'll come back to this issue on fragmentation and why there's so much fragmentation presently, but I want to go on to another question. I want to move from institutions now to the actual training. And here I'd like to deal with a question from Dr. Moira Alatas, which I think this is really important because she's asking us to get to the heart of our understanding of future of work. And for her, to her mind, what we have presented here is a rather shallow interpretation of it. And for her, and I agree with her, what about the role of the social sciences and the humanities in terms of how we shape the training processes for our young children, whether it's TVET or it's at the university level? I think this is important. The social sciences, the humanities are also an important component of the training that we provide to our students because it also helps train them how to think. And even people who get the TVET training also need to learn how to think and how to retrain themselves also as technology develops very quickly. So let me start with you, Jeff. The question has been posed. I'm posing it to you because you dealt with the definition of future of work. You've heard Moira's question. What do you think about what she has said about, are we too shallow in our understanding of future of work?
Yes, I think we are. I think we are because the original research on future of work by Frey and Osborne was actually pretty terrible. It was methodologically deeply flawed. And I'm not saying that because I want to insult Frey and Osborne, because actually they acknowledged in their subsequent research that they had got it wrong. Basically what they had done is they said, well, we expect these technologies to have an impact on these types of tasks and these types of skills. And then they made a leap, which was to say that jobs that involve these types of tasks and these types of skills will all go. And then they came up with this extraordinary claim that 47% of all jobs in the United States would be destroyed because of the impact of fourth industrial revolution type technologies. Now, when this paper was sent for peer review, it never got into any economic journal, any peer-reviewed economic journal, because it's simply not correct. And then on the basis of the economic response, the response of economists to that, they have now changed their approach, particularly Osborne has changed his approach. And in a recent piece for Nesta in the United Kingdom, they have then come to a better, I don't want to say it's the correct conclusion, but a better understanding, which is to say that just because certain tasks in a job will be automated doesn't mean that job itself will go away. So, for example, as academics, we could expect automation of our lectures because we put them into audiovisual material and we don't have to stand in front of the students and do it live once a week. We automate it. But that doesn't mean that our job as an academic goes away. Our job as an academic then focuses on something else, and hopefully it can focus on something which is more productive, higher value added. And what is that as an academic? It's creative, analytical, critical, constructive, positive engagement with all of the issues around. So for us, our productivity should improve because of the automation. Our job won't be taken away, we hope. We would hope that our job won't be taken away, but regrettably, for many academics, the job will go because even the academics don't have this capacity to do anything other than face-to-face teaching. And so once that's automated, regrettably, many of these academics won't have a job at all. And it's similar in other types of profession. And that's really what we need to understand, firstly, about the impact of technology in terms of future of work. The second thing I think we need to understand is that there are very many activities which won't be touched by technology at all. And they will continue to carry on in the same way as they were before. And these are types of activities which we say resist automation, they resist technology, because they are essentially social activities. And many of these social activities will increase in demand. I've already mentioned earlier on social care. Social care for the elderly, for example, is something that is a very high skilled activity. It demands training. It demands, we call it soft skills, but these are not soft skills at all. I mean, these are very demanding skills of patience, understanding, psychology, very difficult environment dealing with people who are frustrated. As they get older, they have mobility issues and all of this sort of thing. And people who can develop skills as a carer in a caring profession that are offered in our universities, particularly in the universities focusing on medicine and nursing and that sort of thing. These are the type of skills, as Paolo pointed out, that we are not spending enough time and resources on, but these are the type of skills that will be in very high demand in the future. They are personal and social in types of activities which resist the technology. Now, in the discussion on the future of work and therefore the future of education and training, we have to understand that. We have to understand that it's not just the technology megatrend that is going to affect the employment environment. It's also other forms of megatrend, such as the demographic megatrend, is going to affect the future of work. So there will be a new demand for new types of activities. And then it comes back very much to the question, are we paying enough attention to that? Is our understanding of the future of work too shallow? I think it is, because unfortunately we tend to think of future of work as being the effect of technology. What is the effect of technology? And therefore the response would be, let's all become technologists. And that's too shallow, that's far too shallow. The effect of technology will be to release us from many activities which can be automated. And then the question is, what do we do with the rest of our time? What do we do with the rest of our people? And that is essentially a social science, humanities issue and policy issue. And that's where we need to focus our attention. How are we going to deal with all of these people who are no longer involved in activities that have been automated away? And then that's where the TVET training has to focus.
I'd like to bring Nurul Iza back into this discussion, because this also speaks to the issue of the TVET training. Now, it's well known, the focus was on STEM, and then it changed to STEAM, where they included the word A, the arts. The arts also becomes important, the humanities become important. Just because they are technically trained, that doesn't mean they shouldn't be exposed to literature, to history. And we all know how important history is. And it's really, we're falling behind when it comes to history. So Iza, what's your view on this? How do we meld this kind of training so that we train our young people more broadly? We're not so narrowly confined in the way we train them.
Well, there's Dr. Edmund, there's almost a trick question, right? Because sometimes you can be too broad, and also you lack the ability to be specialized in a particular subject or subject matter, which is, again, the main tenet of why you need to upgrade the existing levels of TVET curriculum. And I think when you talk, there was a question earlier, I couldn't help but notice about the setup university. We've had a lot of the programs in TVET in Malaysia. 70% actually is hands-on, just 30%, it has been done. They've even emulated under Anton the programs similar to Germany. So, it is really crucial to adopt programs, but also to fit it to local needs, right? You can't just adopt what's happening or what's being done elsewhere. Germany, stronger industrial ties, perhaps less rent seeking in comparison to Malaysia. I mean, these things matter, because in terms of how burgeoning or how successful our industries here, how our startups are being supported, will have an impact on TVET. I remember some of the TVET institutions I went, the colleges in Sabah. I remember one of the first, and they were like, okay, it's great to have it here, but literally we're in no man's land, right? There's not many industries in existence in this particular area. So how do you expect the students, where will the students train? Who will the students train with? So, I mean, I just wanted to mention here, yes, we look at different models, but have an appreciation to what you said just now, the history of Malaysia, our developmental history, our culture, our peoples, the needs of the orang asli communities in a particular area, not the, not just a pure adoption was happening in the urban centers, which are the key determinants of success. People do admit, yes, urbanization have helped improve levels of living, but we can't kind of remove the contextual understanding of our history and appreciate that and absorb that in the growth of programs, including in TVET and university. I think that's perhaps what makes STEAM so crucial, because maybe we, if we don't love our own history, if we don't appreciate different viewpoints of the different stakeholders in this country, then we kind of are setting ourselves for failure. So I am in complete agreement with that, because during my generation, God knows, a couple of decades ago, we were really pushed, to either you becoming a doctor or engineer. I'm serious, it was like the STEM was it, and that was the only kind of determinant or an assurance of job stability. So for me, it's quite crucial also in this regard, in this particular day and age, where you look at the different studies. Of course, I'm going to be mindful of what Prof. Jeffrey said. You can't rely on all studies, and I agree, you can't rely on all consultancies. But for TVET specifically, when I first took over the position over the 6 months, there were so many studies commissioned by the then Barisan Nasional government. It was by Boston Consulting Group, PricewaterhouseCoopers, and I believe studies, should be agnostic, meaning there shouldn't be any political slant to it. If it's a study and it goes through the exact programs across all the government TVET-led institutions, then we have to have the humility to understand, absorb it, and that's how I came up with the bill, because they rated all the top TVET programs across all government institutions in Malaysia and the lower grouping of TVET programs. And from there, you kind of prioritize what works, what doesn't, and then they included the respective institutions to come up with their 3-year plan. How do you improve the needs of your students in the next 3 years? So continuity in this regard is important. And I think, when you talk about STEAM, especially in this day and age, the McKinsey study, which I cited earlier, had highlighted cognitive, interpersonal, self-leadership, and digital skill sets that are crucial. And I'm not going to say that they're always right, but it's something that we have to kind of imbue our students with. The ability to reflect and think and understand the task at hand, because the jobs that we are aware of or comfortable with 5 years ago is no longer the jobs of today. I'm not going to be replaced by robots. I completely agree. I think that's quite an easy, nice, exciting way to look at it. But the point is, it will require more interdisciplinary, multidisciplinary approaches, as well as the ability for our students to remain more confident and able to absorb the needs of the jobs they're going to be involved with. Similarly, this also includes an understanding of the millennial generation, right? Sometimes you take for granted. I'm from Generation X. God knows I'm having a lot of problems with the boomers, right? But can you imagine from the boomers to the Generation X to the Ys and the millennials? These are different segments. It requires some degree of engagement with them in terms of what they expect and moving forward, but also some push, because life is not going to be fair, and you just need to make sure that you equip them with the necessary skill set to survive and thrive, inshallah.
Thank you, Iza. Paulo, would you like to come in? Because I do agree with the point that Iza made. The needs of society matters. And we don't just want to transplant, say, a model from Germany to Malaysia. We got to look at the Malaysian context and what is also happening in the Malaysian context. And this speaks to the question about this speaks to the issue about your table, which you just showed, that captures the Malaysian context quite well. So based on what we were just discussing, what are your views, Paulo, on this?
I would add another element to the picture. that for the first time, university is not the only institution providing this type of service. Nowadays, ACCA, CFA, there are many competitors, but all these competitors are transferring in a very efficient way knowledge. Instead, the university should go backward and transfer less and less knowledge and go back to a simple model that I represent in 2 words, a Socratic model. Less content that students can find easily and high quality everywhere, so we don't have to compete in this direction like we are doing now. Online courses, slides, videos, all the same. This is completely wrong. We have to diversify. We have to find, in every direction we go, the humanistic approach, and to have a different interaction with the students from bottom up, going to the single problem, going to the single students, and try to, so Socrates says, maiotic, help the students to create their knowledge, to structure their knowledge, to understand the problem, and to create the solution of the problem. I understand it's a very philosophical solution, but I think it gives an idea of the challenge that we have and the wrong direction that we are doing now. And the pressure of the COVID, of course, the COVID is a catalyzer, also stress our wrong decision. The wrong decision doing on the spot of this crisis has to be taught in a completely and lived in a different way. So now we give a short-term answer, and we are thinking already to a completely different medium and long-term answer. This is the challenge we have.
Thank you, Paul. I want to move on to the third question. I'm not going to read all the questions, but there are thematic overlaps in the questions that have been posed. For example, Scott, Mohan, and Dr. Yo all referred to the key point which I'd like to get into now, the next key theme, the curriculum itself. The curriculum itself needs to be thought through because, as Nurul Iza just pointed out, we are now looking at the way we structure our curriculum. It has to be more multidisciplinary and interdisciplinary in its nature. So here, Jeff, and I'd like to come back to you, I mean, you know how we work in the university. Mm-hmm. You know how our faculties are so structured by disciplines. We're all in our respective silos, and the students go into these silos and are trained in these silos. When it's very clear that the way in which we have to work to equip our students with future has to change. The curriculum also then has to change. Yes. I would say the same thing to Nurul Iza, on the issue of the curriculum for STEM. And what kind of training? We do know that students spend a lot of time with the firm, yes, but that 30% when they are with the Institute Kemahiran, for example, what exactly are they learning there? Yeah. So let me start with you, Jeff.
I think we need to focus on value. What adds value and how can we add value? And this is also true in general terms. We often focus on high tech. And in a different context, when I was asked about foreign direct investment in Malaysia, I made the point, it's not high tech investment that you want necessarily, it's high value. And if that is with high tech, then so be it. But you can also get very high value from low tech or even no tech activities. And actually for universities, we have to focus on the things that we are very good at doing. And what we are very good at doing is to help people to learn how to think, because that's what we do. And I remember one vice chancellor from a private university, and this will tell you why the vice chancellors of private universities don't like me very much, is that he said, look, in the future, 60% of the jobs in the future are things that we don't know about now. That was his proposition, right? The world will change, industry will change, businesses will change. So all of these jobs that are going to emerge in the future are things we have no conception of now. And so I said to him, well, how can we train people for those jobs if we don't know what they are? We have no idea what these activities are going to be. Well, the answer to that is we don't train people for the jobs.
Yeah.
We don't train people for work. We train people for life is what we do, right? When I went to university in 1989 in Cambridge, I have to tell you categorically, the idea that I would be employed afterwards was simply not a consideration in the choice that I made. The choice to go to university or the choice to read economics, it never occurred to me. I never even thought that as a consequence of spending 3 years there, that I would get a job afterwards. That never even crossed my mind. Now, in fact, the analysis that they do in England says that people who go to Cambridge who get a degree in economics are actually the highest paid graduates. Not me, I have to say, but these are the highest paid graduates. But when I was there, it just wasn't a consideration. Now we are asking kids always to make a consideration when they go to university, is this going to have a vocational return to it? When you finish, are you going to be able to get a job?
Yeah.
Well, actually, we know that many of the jobs that they're aiming to get won't be there. And many of the jobs that are available, they don't know about. So how can they prepare themselves for that world of work? Well, the answer is you don't prepare yourself for the world of work. You prepare yourself for the world of life after university. And in order to do that, we need a different skill sets. And that's the skill set that we're actually very good at delivering in universities, which is how to think, how to feel, how to look, how to interpret, how to engage, how to understand, how to see how the world is changing, and then how to develop plans and strategies that are responsive to that and are not fixed to specific tasks or specific skills or specific curricula. Unfortunately, just to come back to your question about the curricula, there is far too much prescription on curricula, unfortunately. And in my experience, people will blame the ministry or people will blame MQA. As far as I'm concerned, it isn't the ministry or MQA that are being too prescriptive about this. It's ourselves as academics. We as academics are allowing ourselves to be very prescriptive about the type of things that we are teaching our students, and we are putting limitations on ourselves. Without MQA, in my opinion, the quality of education in Malaysia would collapse. They are the last, many people have very many criticisms of MQA, but my view is without it, the standards in education will collapse, in the public as well as the private sector. So we need to have that regulatory framework. But my experience with MQA is that they're nowhere near as prescriptive as we often complain about. It's actually our colleagues and our peers, in my experience, who are prescriptive about curriculum and content. Even telling us, for example, you can't have references or reading on your in your course which is more than 5 years old, which means that Adam Smith's Wealth of Nations, which was written in 1776, cannot be on our economics course. I mean, this type of asinine nonsense. You understand what I mean? Yes. And this is ourselves. And as academics, we have to take responsibility, be reflective of that, and ask ourselves, what are we doing to each other?
Yeah. Thank you, Jeff. I have to intervene now because we are running out of time. Nurul, I really want to hear your views on this point about the curriculum and how you see it. We'll give you 4 minutes.
I mean, I'm a bit shocked because I didn't know about the MQO requirement because most of my readings when I was doing my master's was like, definitely really, really old archaic books, which provided so much richness in my life. So, even in Bahasa Malaysia, right, we talk about most of our poets. I think the issue in Malaysia, and I digress a little bit because I think when the term preparing our graduates for life, I can't take it away or separate it from the fact that we're going to face a serious, or if not already, mental health crisis after the pandemic. And it's like you can't divorce the fact that people need to have some degree of understanding or strength in managing a life. That's not just about earning an income or a living, but also the onslaught of the psychological challenges after what's hit them. So it's something that policymakers, even the industry right now, should really push hard for. I know that HRDF, for example, has about 300 courses that's being offered for free. But if I'm made to understand, a couple of months ago when I spoke to Dr. Stephen, Dr. Arif, he mentioned that they were not available in Bahasa Malaysia. So again, when you talk about lifelong learning, you're providing upskilling, an opportunity for people to feel that they are part of this ecosystem. When you talk about even the courses and the curriculum itself, how do you make students feel that it's relevant to them, that they matter in the teaching, in class? I mean, that helped me when the teacher himself or herself is very engaging. But I think, when you talk about even our MQA, and it's really a time where we can utilize some of this feedback to provide for certain things that are going to be impactful. And this could begin with pilots. I don't claim that from this discussion, we would know exactly what kind of inclusion should be made in the curriculum, but we certainly can introduce them through pilots, especially as schools are going to be reopened slowly. But we can't avoid it. We can't go back to business as usual, because the challenges and society will also be very, very unusual in a post-pandemic world. So I think that would be my input. I believe I value psychology. I value an understanding of the arts, philosophy, and my history far more. I mean, I can't even tell you, the A in STEAM is like perhaps one of the most crucial building blocks in building a resilient graduate out of all the others. I mean, I'm not saying, I always tell my son, maths and science is very important for you, my dear. You have to score all the subjects, including my daughter. But the A, why do we matter? Why does society matter? Why does addressing inequality matter? The A has been taken a far more pivotal presence in comparison to the yesteryears.
Thank you, Isa. I'm afraid we have run out of time, but if you look at the chat box, there's a multitude of questions here and comments, and I think they are very important. There's very important feedback here for us to consider, especially the speakers. I can't push you all more to take on these questions because we have run out of time. But I will say this, in the final session today, we will be discussing many of the points that have been raised by you in your chat. So please do stay with us. I will bring the session to an end, and I will close by first thanking our speakers. Jeff, thank you very much, but you're going to stay on.
Thank you. Yes.
And Paulo will stay on. Very much, Paulo. YB, Nurul Iza, thank you for joining us. I heard that you stay on.
Yeah, I'm so sorry. I really have to go. But I wanted to add on, this is not a neoliberal education or discussion, please. I think that's not what I'm prescribing at all. And I believe that we should kind of revamp the way people look at economics and the way people look at the mainstream learning and system. So please, I just want to place that on record in case it seems like a subscription of what the Western countries are doing and clearly failing.
Yeah, I'm glad you're not prescribing that, Isa. I want to say this, in the last session, I will be speaking about neoliberalism and the kind of education system that it has fostered on us. So I would have liked to hear your views on this too, but unfortunately, Isa is leaving us after this session. I wish you all the best, Isa, with your work in Parliament. You really have a difficult time ahead of you, and we wish you the best with what is to come in Parliament.
Thank you. Thank you very much for having me. I'm really sorry I have to go.
From Gomez, they want to take a photo with YB.
Yes.
Okay.
A typical Malaysian tradition.
Yes.
Sorry, yes.
Yeah, everybody's switch on their camera. Thank you.
No rolling eyes allowed.
Okay, one, two, three. Yeah.
Yeah.
Fahmi, you do that? So we just go up to the second page. Thank you, Wabi.
Okay, thank you.
Take care. Thanks, Dr. Elman. Bye-bye, everyone.
Thank you.
Sorry.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Isa.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, we will now move on to the next session. I will invite Dr. Muhammad Aslam, Professor Aslam.
Terence, there's a request for us to just give 5 minutes to maybe.
Sure.
Yeah.
You're the moderator now, Aslam. You take charge.
So 10:35, 5-minute break for everyone. We are now moving to our second session, and I think as Terence pointed out, we have really a long discussion going on in the chat. It's education is really one of those topics that that get so much attention. I remember when our Dr. Mazli was the education minister, and one of these townhouse meetings were held. People were just lining up to ask him questions, all kinds of questions. So education is certainly something that gets the attention of everyone. It's a very sensitive and it's also a very important issue. Session 2 is going to focus on a topic which sometimes we tend to overlook, and that is views of people who actually education is meant for, and that is our youth and those who are actually in the education system as students, as recipients. The session is termed Speaking from Experience, but not the experience of academics, or necessarily policymakers, but we actually wanted to focus on the experience of the learners themselves. Yeah, so and also those who have been involved in discussions about TVET, in the various committees, and I think we also heard just now there are so many committees established. So what do learners want, and maybe if we can actually try to identify what they need. So in order to talk on this topic, we have two ex-learners. At least they went through the process. Miss Nur Rabiatul Adawiyah, who was at the German Malaysian Institute and is a graduate of the program, and who is now a customer order planner. I'm sure she will tell you what exactly that is, with Robert Bosch. And followed by Mr. Das Vinderen Partiven, who went through the Penang Skills Development Center course and is a graduate of that program. And he is a OAI apprentice coach, stroke technician with Braun Medical Industries. So these are the two learners that we have, or people who have gone through the program. Our third speaker will be Mr. Jufitri bin Johar, who is the president of the Malaysian Youth Council. I know I think he's a lawyer by training, but he's now very active with youth organizations and has been the president for the Malaysian Youth Council. And I think he sits in these various committees that talk about education, higher education, TVET education. And our final speaker will be Mr. Daniel Bernbeck, who is the CEO and member of the board of the Malaysian German Chamber of Commerce. So somebody who will try to give something on maybe the German experience and his own experience in Malaysia, what he sees are some of the challenges. So with that list of speakers, let me just say a couple of things about the context here. When we talk about Malaysian education, especially higher education, there is certainly a clear tension between what we may call the public education system and the private education system. And we have the same thing when it comes to the TVET education. Yeah, we have over 1,000 institutions offering TVET courses or programs, and half of them are in the public sector, in schools, in vocational colleges, in technical institutes, as well as in the 4 public universities that we have, UTHM, University Technical Malacca, University Malaysia Pahang, and UNIMAP in Perlis. Yeah? So in addition to these various public institutions, we also have a huge number of private institutions. In addition to that, we have been introduced to the idea that companies need to be involved in this TVET program. And yet we seem to indicate from the first session that it's not happening as much in Malaysia as we would like to, right? So that maybe will be some of the questions that we want to tackle in this session too. But let's begin with something from our own young graduates of TVET programs. I would now like to maybe ask Noor, firstly, a little bit about your school background. What school were you in? What made you choose TVET as an option? Were your parents petrified when you told them that you wanted to do TVET and you didn't want to become a lawyer or a doctor or or whatever else that usually we parents sometimes want for our kids? Did you get any advice in your school, or was it your own decision? No.
Okay, Assalamualaikum and good morning to all. Thank you, Mr. Aslam. First of all, I'm from my high school was St. Anne's Convent. I'm from background of high school with female students, so I have no interaction with boys. So actually interested in TVET because my fathers and my parents both are working in the manufacturing industry, so they have the experience of how does it we need to have skills in future. So I went through the education fair after I leave graduate from XPM. So went through the education fair. There is a private company such as Bosch, B Brown, and Osram there. So actually, I don't have much choices on universities. So it was all decided by my parents. I don't have any specific. Oh, I want to be engineer. I want to be lawyer. No, I don't have that kind of option. And I also okay, whatever my parents decide, I will say yes. I will try because in university studies there will be the same like high school. We go to classes and we doesn't have the much practical when we study. So when I go through the TVET program by Bosch, so there is like 70% practical training and 30% of theory at the same time. So okay, this kind of program sounds interesting to me, and some more is like fully sponsored by Bosch, so I don't need to pay for the education loan, and it's all free for the diploma. And it was my parent as well that drove me to this program as well, and as well as the coaches.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you. This is a good example of parents who actually thought of this as a future prospect for you, and I suppose being a very representative Malaysian daughter, you followed your parents' wishes. Yeah, and that's wonderful. Das Vinderen, can I ask you the same question? What is your education background? Why did you choose this? Were your parents just like Noor's parents, supportive, or were they a bit worried?
Yeah, thank you, Professor Muhammad Aslam. Yeah, okay, so I was studying in SMK Jalan Damai in Mukim Tajam. Okay, so I'm basically our economics students, which is not related to engineering at all.
Okay.
Yeah. So besides, I also love sports lah, and that's why I'm more to hands-on people. Yeah. So actually, it was when they first approached by a different company, which is Southern Steel. They come to my school, so they will give us talk about it lah. They give that saying what. This we have a program, TVET program. We have 70% practical, 30% theory. So I was like, okay. So they said, then they asked for sign up. So I just sign up lah. So actually after I go home, then I just did some research lah. Actually, what's what TVET? So actually I found it's more to practical based side. It's not which is a completely different one is from a theory from like a university. So actually, then after that, I just consult with my teachers. Then the teachers will say, "Hey, I think this is a good program lah. Then you should persuade it." So I also felt the same thing. So I signed up for it.
Wonderful. That's great. I mean, it's good. It's good to know that both of you, the decisions in a way were your own choice and not because as sometimes people perceive that, TVET is something, for those who couldn't get into university. I think both of you, from what you mentioned, it seems to be something that either your school, in the case of Dasvindran, or in the case of Noor, you decided to do this on your own. So now the second question to you, Das. Do you think that your experience going through, the program in the Penang, school, did it assist you in meeting whatever expectations you had, and how are you feeling now? Being attached to your place of work.
Okay. I could say it was not, as you say, like now you're like fully equipped. Equipped with the necessary skills and also a knowledge, and besides your personal development, the mature thinking. The thinking was different compared to my friends lah. So my friends based on university. So whenever I ask about these things, they might like get slower a bit. So because we are actually in the real world, right? So we understand more the reality. Yeah.
Okay, so you basically feel that going through that program, you are better equipped, or at least you are equipped to handle workplace, right? So it's a right choice for you. Noor, what about you? What do you think?
For me, I think it is the same as Das, because whenever I talk about my courses, it is different from my friends who attend the universities. Because what I think good about TVET is that we gain work experience at the same time, and also the knowledge we get to blend in with the work environment, and also the people there working there also treat us like we are their colleague. We are not a student there, so they will share with us how does the work is it. And I think it's a good choice also for me to choose this path. And also the coaches and instructor are being good to us. They, whenever we have like a difficulty or trouble, they will always, okay, you can come to us and we will teach you, or whatever you don't understand or you have problem, they will assist us.
Okay, so maybe the last question for both of you, very simple one. You have your classmates who chose other paths. Maybe some went to universities. You have a job. What about your classmates? Do they have jobs? Do you know? So how do you compare yourselves with your classmates? Noor?
For me right now, I'm 22 years old, so I already have a job. I already have a cert of advanced diploma. Compared to my friends, they are still studying in their degrees and have yet to graduate due to the pandemic. They have to attend the online classes, and they're also unable to go to the practicals companies to do their practicals. So compared to me, I already graduate and I have a job in my hand, and it's quite stable for me at 22 years old to gain both work and education at the same time.
Wonderful. And Das, what about yourself? How do you compare yourself with your classmates?
As I mentioned before, that now I have a job, end of month, we can buy anything. Yeah. As well, no. Yeah. As well, no. I won't own a car as now. Yeah. So compared to my friends, they are still studying. Some of them even never finished a diploma yet. So yeah, so I'm grateful for that.
Okay, thank you, Das, and thank you, Noor. Although I myself, I think Terence, Jeff, we're all with universities, and so it's not an advertisement to tell people not to come to universities. But I think the whole idea that we are talking about this morning is, what is it that we need, and what would best serve not only the needs of the country, but also the needs of those who are in our school system and later on would choose a higher education option. Let me move to Saudara Jofitri, who as the president of the Malaysian Youth Council, I'm sure you've been in many discussions, about youth education, higher education, and of course in more recent times, unemployment, and even the new phenomena of underemployment, right? So maybe just some basic ideas on what you see the situation for youth when it comes to higher education, and whether or not Malaysian Youth Council has any ideas on what are the ways forward.
Thank you very much. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh, and very good morning. Thank you, Prof. Aslam, for moderating this session. Colleagues, panelists, and the rest, ladies and gentlemen. Under President of Malaysian Youth Council, we are focusing more on, previously, since 1948, we are more focusing on leadership, education, and of course, TVET, one of those focus that we are fighting for. For your information, Prof, we are since I think for a couple of years, we are involved directly in promoting TVET in various institutions and schools, and we more focusing on advocacy and promoting the TVET, because we believe that we must try to improve the perception of the community towards the TVET, especially among the young people, that TVET should be at par with the choice of academic as well. So we have to convince our parents and our young people at the school that you should also opt for TVET as the first choice. So that's why we organize various programs down to earth to see the young people at the school level to promote themselves to opt for TVET for the first choice, apart from saving the boys, especially from dropout, because we identified that it is proven that most of the boys in the school, their inclinations towards TVETs more than the academics. So that's not necessary that they are not perform in education, because in education we believe in to ensure that the young people, especially the boy, to become a human and serve the nation. So that's why we try to be balanced between, especially the boys. We try to, educate themselves to be balanced between becoming a good human, serve for the country. At the same time, they're well equipped with the skills. So that's why we already secure collaboration with the Ministry of Labour just before the COVID, to collaborate with the ministry on how to promote and to enhance the application of the young people, especially the boy, to enter into the TVET, because as I mentioned earlier, most of the boy are inclined more towards the TVET. And in every policy platform, including the Cabinet's Committee for the Youth Affairs, in the National Youth Consultative Council, we always fight for the fate of the TVET. We always try to improve the good image of the TVET amongst the policy makers, among the parents and the youth, especially by reiterating that TVET should be at par and the first choice for at par with the academic, to be the first choice of the young people in Malaysia. So we always,
If I just intervene here,
Yeah.
The Malaysian Youth Council, maybe many in the audience, may not realize who the Malaysian Youth Council represents. So maybe the number of associations, it's across across the country kind of association. And secondly, do you think that for the last 10 years, or ever since Youth Council has been involved in discussions, do you think that there has been a more positive view on TVET among society, all levels of society?
Yeah, thank you, Prof. For your information, Malaysian Youth Council was established in 1948, 9 years before independence. We are aimed to unifying all the youth, regardless ethnicity, religious adherence, and so on. So we are comprising of 40 main youth organizations, ranging from Sabah, Sarawak, Aboriginal youth, and most recently we managed to establish Disabled Youth Council to secure and to be inclusive in terms of bringing the voice of the youth in Malaysia. So we are cover various cohort and component of the youth segment within the society. So for your second question, Prof, we are of course we are fighting for this TVET agenda since I think 2010, whereby we always urge the government to enhance especially the TVET fund, to further ensure that more young people have opportunities to apply for the TVET fund. Compared to the PTPTN, it amounted to 1 billion. At that particular time, we got only 300 million fund for the TVET compared to the PTPTN up to 1 billion. It is not at par in terms of the image of if we were to talk about the balance between academic and the TVET. So we keep reiterating this our demand in the National Youth Consultative Council, chaired by the Minister of Youth and Sport, to enhance the TVET fund amounted to 1 billion. Apart from that, we also try to help our young prisoners, especially those who just came out from the prison, and we want them to provide them with a second chance, and we want to secure the job for them. So we try to train with the Yellow Ribbon Project to help our young prisoners to get a job through TVET. And in conclusion, Prof, we still, as according to the recent research done by UNIMAS IRIS, Institute of Youth Research, whereby Malaysian Youth Council is in, we identified that still the perception of the communities, especially the family and the young people towards TVET, still low. So this is our main challenge to promote TVET.
All right, thank you very much, Julfitri. I think your last comment moves very nicely to the fourth speaker. Maybe to start the ball rolling, just a bit of background about the first session talked about the German experience, in which unlike maybe in many countries, TVET is not something necessarily government run. It's something that the private sector plays a big role. So, Mr. Bernbeck, how do you, being part of the German Malaysia, the Chamber of Commerce, and looking at the efforts that have been done in Germany, and now, being in Malaysia and seeing what's happening in Malaysia, what is your own view about some of the strengths of the TVET in Malaysia, and what you think are some of the main challenges that we face in TVET in Malaysia?
Thank you, Professor, and salam sejahtera to all the listeners, and thank you to CAS, also to Konrad-Adenauer-Stiftung, for inviting me. And in fact, you pointed at the right issue or topic that we like to share. Is the German system is very much driven by the private sector. It is driven by the chambers. So this applies to the chambers of crafts for craftsmanship, but this is also applying to the industry and commerce in the Chamber of Commerce and Industry that we do for our TVET programs. This is something that goes back into German history, and it has, of course, as Nurul Izzah pointed out rightly, it has to deal with the history of the country, of the society, of the mentality, the way people think that things should be done. So you cannot just simply plug and play something from another society and bring it to Malaysia and expect it to work exactly the same way. But in Germany, it works, and I think the industry is an international industry. Science is international, as Professor Jeffrey also pointed out. It is very much the question of how things are done in the world. And it is not Malaysia as an island, Germany as an island. We are all working together around the world. So we have to look how things are done in other places and try to emulate and to translate it into local conditions. And that is what MGCC, Malaysian German Chamber, is doing. We are bringing over the German curriculum and the training concepts of a industry-driven, demand-driven, technology-driven education, technical vocational education and training. But we adjust it not only to the vocabulary of local students, and I hope that Noor and Daz will confirm what I just said, that we try to bring in the background and the view and the angle and the perception of the local youth in Malaysia, so that they can really relate to the content that they are being taught. Otherwise, it wouldn't ring a bell, it wouldn't resonate in their minds, and that is what we are doing. And coming back to your question, what I see is also why Nurul Izzah already mentioned the complete unorganized or all over the place kind of running of TVET is an issue, because the chambers in Germany are exactly for that purpose, because we are a federal state country like Malaysia, and we also tend to have diverse rules and diverse cultures in the federal states of Germany. And I think that is exactly why chambers are so important, because we harmonize it. We avoid this kind of disparity and disconnect. And I think what is number one priority should be is to harmonize and to standardize at TVET in Malaysia. That would mean to remove all these 7 ministry doing everybody does what he thinks is best. That is one. And I think make it more industry driven, get the industry, what YB also mentioned, bring the industry into play, give in a council or a role to have a say, because if they have this influence, that's a buy-in for them. Then they can engage, and then they will influence, and then they will drive it in the direction where it should be.
Yeah, I just want to go one step further. I did a bit of reading, and I came across this program that you were involved late last year. And the program talked about the huge amount of resources that was allocated, for TVET.
Yes.
Last year's budget, 6 billion ringgit, right? And I think one of the points that came out was we're not getting, yes, we allocate a lot of money, but we're not getting the return for that amount of money.
Yes.
Right? And I want to just connect that with something you said, that the model that we do is a train and place model. Whereas you were talking about the place and train model. So maybe something, along that lines, if you could just maybe elaborate.
And that's, of course, one of the key issues we are seeing. And that is the key benefits of a German dual vocational program here we do in Malaysia. It is a place and train. So we first look at, like Noor and Das already experienced it, we first looked for companies. We as chambers coordinate the selection process. So we find young school leavers with SPM and STPM and all these qualifications that you bring. You have to have a good command of English. And then we find a matching company, which in this case was B. Brown and was Bosch, but there's many more. And so you become a member of the workforce on day one. You are not taught in some place, and coming to what Jeffrey said, the social elements of that education, you don't get taught in a classroom by teachers as they have never been in an industry. And then once you are done and have your certificate, you knock at the door at some company and try to figure out how working life looks like. And that's a train and place concept. We don't think that is really successful. We do it the other way around. We first find the company, and then you get included integrated in the workforce as a trainee. And you have to be on time in the morning, and you have your working shirt, your company shirt on. You have your trainee allowance. This allows you to continue you start your education without a loan, without a scholarship. You enter the education without any debts, and you exit the education without any debts because you are being paid. And that is also beneficial for the industry, because we have done some research on that. After, our education is 36 to 40 months, so it's a bit longer than Malaysian standard TVET. But after the 15 or 16 or 18 months, even these young trainees become productive. So the company earns from their work because they become integrated in the workforce. So it's already paying back or paying off for the companies. So it's beneficial for all parties involved. And that is why we believe it is much more feasible, much more cheaper to allocate money for the German dual vocational training style instead of putting billions into programs that don't increase employability for the young degree holders.
Thank you very much. So, it looks like as if the model that is being proposed, that means a model that tries to allow more, bigger role for industry in TVET education, would be good for the government. They would spend less. You would have a better output, at least from, the German experience. I think the question that is asked, and Farid Faiz puts it very nicely, asking Noor and Das, but actually can also be answered by Mr. Bernbeck. Is there a difference in the TVET experience that, let's say, the German Malaysia Institute provides, and the TVET experience that one would get in our public universities, the technical universities that, Malacca and Pahang and so on? Is there a difference in these two?
I would like to point out one, and maybe the two graduates from our program could add to that. I would say one very personal and very human experience is you avoid this frustrating experience of having graduated and then finding out that nobody wants to employ you or doesn't want to pay you the salary you expect, because you knock at the door and then you have to be upskilled because you come into a place that you have never been to. You talk to bosses and superiors that you have not met. You look at machines that you have never touched. So that frustration of a young person can be avoided if you bring him or her in as an apprentice. So they work in the hierarchy, in the organization, they work on the machine, they will be working after the graduation. And honestly, me, having graduated from a university as a lawyer, it is a tough experience to be there and sending applications and applications and applications and being turned down and not even invited to an interview and all that. That can be stressful and traumatic even. So I would say a big difference to the train and place versus the place and train is that avoids these frustrating experiences for people. They feel they are part of the society. They are part of a trusting employer-employee like relationship. There is an experience that the employer invests into you. He shows trust and he shows a perspective for you, and this is of course also increasing the retention and the loyalty of workforce towards employer, because you become a partner of a bilateral agreement. That is, I think, a very inspiring experience in our TVET program. So
basically, not all TVET programs are the same, and we need to basically make sure that those that are lacking in certain important areas, we need to improve those areas. So Noor and Das, you went to your own programs, and maybe you have colleagues or classmates that went to some of the other TVET programs. Do you compare notes with your classmates? What is it that you have, or what is it that you learned which your colleagues didn't do? And there was actually another question from Dr. Alatas on, do you think you could have learned anything more in your own program? Was there anything that you felt that you didn't do that you would like to have done? Maybe Noor, if you are able to comment.
For me, what I can compare with my another colleague who also attend TVET, because my program is more into logistic operation management, and the other colleague was in mechatronics. So what makes us different is that they are more into industrial or production side, but mine is more onto customer interface and learn about the processes in the manufacturing. How does the supply chain work? How do we make all the process in the manufacturing work in terms of supply chain and logistic? And what I achieved that other didn't achieve that my program, because I'm German Malaysian Institute, so I have to learn German language. Okay. So this is the extra for me compared to other colleagues in mechatronic. They didn't learn German because they are attend in PSTC. So we have to learn German in one semester. So it is also an additional for us to know how does German language it is for us.
Okay, did you feel that there were things that you would like to have learned but you didn't learn in your program? Is there any element?
For me, from this program, I think I achieved all, because I'm kind of type of person have a lot of questions. Why do we do this? Why do we do that? So there's actually doesn't have anything more because I can get all in one places. If I don't know this, then I can go and ask this person because all the working people is the professional and expertise. So they know what are they explaining to us and how do we implement this in our daily or work life.
Yes.
Okay. Das, the same question to you. I mean, do you think that there are things that you would have learned in a university that maybe you didn't learn in your program? I know it's quite a tough one, huh? Maybe tough for you to think about. Yeah.
Yeah. I didn't learn in university.
Do you miss the theory? Do you miss the theory, the abstract concepts that you would do in theory? You know,
if you ask me, for theory based, the theory more to exact what is based on the company requirement as a customized knows everything. So whether it's like say I'm studying for mechatronics, so eventually the company will require PSDC so will arrange for the syllabus according to the mechatronic or customer company requirement. So the lack, I still doesn't feel the lack in workplace. Still like feel everything is there because a mixture around with many people. You have a mentor, you have a colleague, you have your junior or senior. It's like it's more like like society or community we mix around.
Okay,
Yeah.
so maybe I'll put this question to Saudara Julfitri. Yeah, I mean there have been some comments in the chat about the need to humanize. I think Tan Sri Zul has been talking about this, the need to humanize education, and we've been talking about it a lot in the public universities. Do you think that TVET education, is able to humanize? I mean, sometimes people have the impression TVET is all about, machines. Yeah, as Noor put it, she went to an all-girls school, so she moved from all girls to machines, no boys in between. So, do you think that there is a way to humanize TVET education, and how would we do it?
Yeah, Prof, based on our experience, because previously we have organized several programs related to TVET. For example, we promote smart tech to assist the industries to get workforce, especially among the young people. So we organized one program called Smart Tech 2.0, whereby before they enter the industry, especially the factory or with the employer. So we spend 3 weeks with them to equip themselves with various soft skill, leadership skills, and try to equip themselves with the values and the philosophy of the education. So this is a very successful program that we have before that called Smart Tech. We try to fulfill and to be balanced between high tech and high touch, whereby, as I mentioned earlier, that we spend 3 weeks to equip the young people with specific skill like leadership, soft skill on how to be a good workers, and provide them with a certain universal values on how to be a good workers and serve for the nation, not for themselves only. So they have a duty and responsibility to serve for the nation, not only for themselves. So we managed to spend 3 weeks by providing them mentor as well among the youth leaders. So I think this kind of model we can integrate in our informal education system, because we always treat youth movement as a place for informal education. Yeah, apart from formal education in university and schools, youth association play a vital role in providing informal education. So that's why we try to integrate in smart tech between high tech and high touch. Prof.
Thank you very much. I think an important point. There are so many comments in the chat. I mean, there's one that comes to mind. TVET is not just skill-based. Nabila is saying this. It is competency-based, and I think that's a very important part of what we need to have in our workforce.
If I made it, Prof, based on that comment, because in order to improve the perceptions of TVET among the communities. So we try to, illustrate to the young people and the community that TVET is, it is not restricted only towards certain skills, but it is, of course, competencies, because most recently, we tried to promote professional youth work by providing those who are interested in this professional youth work, apart from academic field. So we managed to complete national occupational skills standards in order to promote a professional youth worker through TVET, TVET stream. And another initiative made by Malaysian Youth Council is to further enhance TVET in esports. Most of the young people love to involve in esports, so we try to providing and promote esport through TVET by providing related skill. Let's say, for example, streaming production, business marketing, monetization, on how to produce video and so on. So I think TVET is quite interesting when we talk about in a very vast field. Thank you, Prof.
Thank you. I mean, this I think maybe to Daniel, there's a question from Scott Jordan, or at least the first part of the question. How do you balance training and learning? The fear that TVET may give you a job now, but is the program that you have, does it enable people to acquire learning skills so that you can adapt for the future?
Yes, we give in our program, we also assist the trainees in the program. We also monitor the progress of the trainees together with the coaches. We also train the coaches in their pedagogical skills and abilities, because not all of the technicians, senior technicians in some workshop are like born teachers. So there is this kind of interaction between the chamber, securing the quality and also avoiding wrong behaviors that you always have in situations where apprentices are being exploited as cheap labor instead of being taught the things they need to learn in the practical phase. And to answer your question, I think there is this possibility to develop learning skills, because we use a block model, which is not so common in Germany, but it is exactly also an adaptation or adjustment to the Malaysian environment. That we have the practical training in the companies, and then we have like a block model where people go to GMI or to PSDC and then have teaching for a longer period. In Germany, you would have it like 3 days in the company, 2 days in the school every week. So there's a constant back and forth. Here in Malaysia, we do it like constantly for a few months in the factory and a few months in school. So that allows them to really go into like this training mode, a learning mode at the school. So but I think it is very important to point also, and I hope we will touch the point of transition between TVET and university, because maybe, Professor, if you want to touch that later, I will keep my answer to that point, because where's the link between academia, higher education, and tertiary education on the TVET? Because that is, I think, another point that I would like to highlight when we come.
There is a question actually on that. Ghazali Abu talks about, his view is that industrial-based TVET, may be something that focuses on one particular industry, whereas university education, in theory, is supposed to enable you to go to many industries or change it. So maybe your comment on that.
Yeah, that's a good point. And I think that is exactly why we are involved as chambers. We of course, you see some companies, bigger companies, multinational companies, they have their own training academies because they can afford it. And they train for their own specific purposes. And taking BMW as one quite well-known, I would say, automotive manufacturer versus Mercedes. You would expect that cars in today's world are more or less running computers with wheels. So they would, if somebody is trained at Mercedes, he could easily go over to work at BMW, but that's simply not the case, because the education in their training academies is very specific. The programs are very specific. The line of thought is very specific. So it's really not increasing the employability of the young people or of the graduates from that program. Our program as chambers is, of course, overarching the industries, the companies. We are making sure that a mechatronics certificate applies to more than one company. So it increases employability, it increases mobility from Penang to Johor. So you are not bound to stay with that company forever, because life is dynamic. You might marry and you might move ahead to some place and you need to go find another job. So our certificate is not only that it is also a so-called dual certification, because we qualify under JPK and under German standards. We make sure that it is also applicable to Malaysian standards. And because there was one critical question whether that is a colonialist attitude of Germany trying to promote its own model in Malaysia, and Malaysians have to become Germans, that's simply not the case, because we make sure that JPK is certifying. So we leave the Malaysians to stay Malaysians as long as they like. They can find jobs under their JPK certificate in a Malaysian company, but they can also use the German certificate for a German company, or maybe a European American company that would say, okay, a German certificate is something that also qualifies you. You have seen high tech, you have seen the technology. So I take you in, I employ you. So that is maybe the answer to your question.
Okay, I don't know about Malaysians becoming Germans, but I would love our Malaysian football team, to get more like the German football team.
Or the Italians I would promote at the moment.
There's a question to Noor. I think it's an interesting one from Moya Zakwan. Is there any gender stereotyping that you may have experienced in your workplace or even in your program? Are you treated equally or differently because of gender? Do you see that?
From my experience in my courses, we have 7 person, which include me, 2 girls and 5 boys. But then there is no gender stereotype toward us. They treat us equally. Even in our work area, we are treated equally as them. Means that there is no discrimination toward the gender in Bosch. In my experience, they will treat us like their colleague. There is no gender inequality here.
I know as a general, from a macro point of view, I do know that despite having similar qualifications, I think the wage rates for salaries for females are less than males. So I'm not too sure. I wouldn't want to comment, but at least in your individual case, it's shown that you feel that there is no discrimination or anything. Does anyone know about this TVET? If anyone knows about whether TVET education, the wage differentials are less than other jobs. I'm not personally not aware of this, but I know macro level there is apparently.
I'm getting an advanced diploma, but then the salary level is same as degree level, which around 2.5 plus. I'm getting that level kind of salary with my current diploma. So for me, it is a good thing that I choose TVET, because this also gives me skills and knowledge at the same time. So because I gain both, and I think it is a good thing as well for others to also expose to this program as well.
Okay, thank you. There is a comment from Nur Farida, who says that trying to compare TVET and universities is a problem because the mission and philosophy of it may be very different. I think it's a point well taken. Maybe in this last 10 minutes or so, I'd like to go maybe to something that will lead to the next session, and that is to get maybe the inputs from the panelists in session 2. A lot of money is spent, too many ministries involved, so you have a very uncoordinated thing. What can we actually do to make the TVET system more effective? I mean, I know there are some ideas that have been put forward, but if we could just get maybe 1 or 2 from every one of the panelists, what do you think needs to be done in order to make the TVET experience and system in Malaysia more effective? Anyone to start with? Julfitri or Daniel, maybe I think maybe Das and Noor may want a little bit more time to think about this, but Julfitri or Daniel, 1 or 2 things that you think we need to do as a takeaway from this session to make the system more effective.
Maybe if I just jump in because I think there is only one, and I'm listening to you repeating the question now 2 times. It always comes in my mind. It always comes up. The first answer would be, get it into real life. Take it out of the history books and get it applied to the workshop floor, shop floor, to the real life, hands-on. And that is, the answer would be, get the industry involved, get the private sector involved. I don't know. Maybe I have not. Maybe my view is narrowed by being a German, and because I was brought up in that culture of a very private sector driven education. But looking around, and I know that not only Malaysian government has gone around the world and went into different various countries to look, and even the US and the People's Republic of China has chosen the German model. There must be something. And I think the differentiating factor is the industry involvement. And that would be, to me, the answer to your question.
Okay. The other point in the panel that you were involved last year, there was a comment from one of the other panelists that the associations are not involved in decision making in Malaysia. Is that still the case? I mean, it's at the level of you give inputs, but you're not really making any decisions.
We are not. Of course, we are not making any decisions because we also back from Germany. We have a philosophy of let the government do what the government knows best. That is decision making and law making, and let the industry do and the private sector do what they know best, and don't mix these two. So don't let the government get involved in industry and not the other way around. So in our case, I would expect, or I would hope, and maybe just one recent example, we are suffering badly at the moment as German industry in Malaysia because the schools are closed. The international schools are closed. People are taking their kids, their families partly out to Europe. Mostly the wives take their kids, go back to Germany because the schools are open. Here in Malaysia, the schools are closed. And if we voice our concerns, of course, we are not involved in the decision whether MOE or anybody would allow schools to be opened in the current situation. But the same applies to the TVET in general. Sometimes we have the experience that laws are being enacted, like on the MM2H program. And after that, the laws come out, or after the decision has been made, then the consultation starts. We would hope to have a different way so that first we are consulted, where first we get involved with the government, not being as decision makers, but as advisors, as commenters. And then the decision would be made based on the input. So I don't see the involvement directly in the decision making of the industry, of the private sector.
Okay, Joe 53, any?
I have 3 suggestions, Prof. The first one is to coordinate well TVET institution under one umbrella, as what we fight for such a long time, to have one umbrella to coordinate all the TVET institution. I'm not sure whether the recent TVET Council is functioning well under the previous Prime Minister. I do hope that we will coordinate all the TVET institution under one umbrella. Second one is to rebrand TVET into more appealing and interesting in the eyes of the families and the young people especially, so that we can recruit more young people to opt TVET as the first choice apart from the academic. And the third one, of course, as mentioned and posted by Prof. Zulkifli Razak, we agree that we have to be balanced between high tech and high touch, so that we will produce a balance students to balance between the philosophy of the education and also to fulfill the needs of the job. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Okay, to Noor and Das, I mean, you can comment on this suggestion you want to make, but I would also like you all, the two of you, to actually focus, also on what advice would you give your younger colleagues who are now maybe in school and they are making their decision. What would you advise them? Maybe Das, if you have something.
Okay. Maybe I know was like maybe they should consider TVET as well. Maybe they can do research about it. If they can do research about it, how TVET works, or maybe they can have a consult with TVET. So maybe in terms of, I think school also need to, maybe the government should also implement more emphasis on this as well.
Did your school have a vocational stream? Does?
No.
Okay, so you got the information based on the roadshow that was done, and
I think the company came to my school.
Right. So you were lucky in that sense, because if not, you wouldn't have known this, right?
Yeah. Actually, I want to add another thing. So,
yeah.
Okay. Actually, I'm currently I'm doing a part-time degree.
Okay.
Okay, part-time degree. So where there's, I felt that when I want to transfer, is GPK because I have a GPK certificate. Then want to persuade in the part-time degree at university.
Okay.
For continuous study. So
can I just know what degree you are wanting to do?
Engineering, electronic, and electrical.
Engineering. Okay.
Yeah. So there's a topic where they said GPK, they didn't familiar with the GPK certificate. The first thing I give the certificate, they say, "Yeah, what is certificate is this?" I want to get shocked a bit. So this kind of thing, they should. But even though I asked personally to MQA email, they said GPK is under MQA. But then one university is not recognized about it. I was like, get shocked a bit. So even can't transfer credit as well. Yeah, this is a concern a bit. Okay.
Right. So this comes under maybe what Jufitri was talking about, the very bad coordination, governance issues, and fragmented TVET delivery all over the place, right? So that's a major challenge. Noor, any advice to your younger brothers and sisters who may be thinking about a career?
Actually, I will suggest the same thing to join the TVET, because nowadays or in future, employer are looking at the person who have skills and knowledge at the same time. So they will not waste time to train these people, because they already have the skills and knowledge. So why would they choose the one without experience and one with experience? Of course, they will choose the one with experience, so it will reduce their time to train these people. So our TVET program is not a waste actually. It is a good path to pursue your higher education. So more you get an early exposure to work environment.
Okay, thank you very much. I think as mentioned by Terence just now, and I think Jeff put it in the chat, there's so many comments and questions that require us to have more sessions like this, but unfortunately we've come to the end of our session. Daniel, you have your hand up, so okay, maybe a quick point from you. Yeah.
Yes, a quick point would be the career as a TVET graduate. Just a good example that we had, because the former CFO of Infineon in Kulim High Tech Park, Dato Peter Halm, a German Dato, he was registered as our board member in our chamber. And SSM kept rejecting his registration as a board member. And the reason was he didn't supply his university degree. And they kept rejecting. And I went to the SSM officer here in KL and to meet her. And I explained to her, this person is a CFO of a large multinational high-tech semiconductor firm in Kulim High Tech Park, and a CFO here, and a Dato. He doesn't hold a university degree. He has a TVET graduate. He has grown from a TVET education in industrial management up to the CFO of a big multinational plant here in Malaysia. So that is the history of a German thing. You can do a career up to the top without a university degree. And then she accepted and registered him as a board member to the MGCC, to our chamber.
Alhamdulillah, we at least we had praise. we came to that right decision, even with a little bit of explanation. Thank you very much to all the panelists. As I mentioned just now, so many comments and questions. I hope everybody gets a chance to read all of them. We certainly need to organize another session or even two on this very, very important topic of higher education, on TVET education. Maybe just to end, when I was doing a little bit of research on the topic, and there are so many references. Yeah. there has been realization in Malaysia, especially in the last 10, 15 years, on the importance of TVET, right? I don't think anybody can say that there has been, no interest and understanding of some of the issues. But I think the main challenge is in implementation. We are not able to do what we even say in some of these reports, right? I mean, the four challenges I'm reading from a report that was done by the ministry itself: uncoordinated governance, fragmented TVET delivery, competency gaps, lack of recognition. Yeah, these are four challenges in one report, and in many other reports, the problem of TVET still being seen as a second choice, salaries that are not commensurate. So all of these things, I think, are there, but we seem to lack, as what our late Dr. Abdulhamid Abu Sulaiman, our former rector of the IIUM, said. There seems to be a lack of will to get it done, and I think that is really maybe where our next session needs to try and focus. How do we actually move to, getting that will to move forward, and to move forward in the Malaysian context? Yeah, so it's gets very, very complex and complicated when we want to talk about moving anything, in the Malaysian context, 7 ministries, all kinds of views, etc. So with that, let me just end. My apologies for any shortcomings, and we will take another short break, and we will be back at 11:45 for the third session. So thank you once again to all the panelists, Noor, Das, Jufitri, and also Daniel, and we hope that everyone will stay with us for the next session. Yeah. So
thank you, Professor.
Assalamu alaikum.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
As I mentioned in session 2, the third session is in a way trying to bring the points that were discussed in session 1 and 2, and to try and look forward as to what are those things that we need to do, what are the reforms that we need to make. Some of these things we know, but for a variety of reasons, we are not able to do them. Okay, so maybe as as a first question to maybe all three speakers, and the previous discussions have been focusing on higher education, but with TVET in mind, especially session 2 was focusing on TVET education. So in this third session, we want to maybe take a step back and look at higher education or universities as a whole. So maybe to begin with, what are universities for, and are they fulfilling their mission? And this will also cover many of the comments that were made in the chat. So maybe to YB Dr. Mazli, what are universities for, and are they fulfilling their mission at present?
Okay, thank you, Prof. Hanif. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh, and a very good morning or very good afternoon to everybody. Guten Tag, guten Morgen, meine Herren und meine Damen. So, because somebody greeted me in German, so I need to reply back with all the little German that still left in my medulla oblongata. But anyway, so thank you, the organizer, and everybody, especially to Prof. Geoff Hawes, who have been inviting me to this lovely event. And coming back to your question, what are universities for? It's very philosophical in nature, and I have to make a disclaimer. I'm still in a state of confusion, whether I'm still an academic or am I now a politician? Because sometimes when I talk about education, I cannot get rid of the nature of being part of the policymakers. But again, the spirit of being an educator and part of the academia world makes me closely knitted to the very spirit of academia. So coming back to the question, what are universities for? I would say universities are cradles or incubators to produce innovators, knowledge creators, and problem solvers for the world, if not for a nation. But all these people that universities produce must be within the spirit of enlightened intellectuals. From there, you have your thinkers, your professors, your researchers, your professionals, skillful workers, managers, CEOs, but with integrity, dignity, and full of humanity. They're not only thinking intellectuals, but their sojourn or maybe their life in the university is an episode of their life journey where they experience the process of enlightenment. The ultimate goal then for any universities is to become the brain and soul of the nation and for the society, and to solve real problems in human life. When you're talking about models, people often talk about Cambodian, and for me, I often referring to Edward Said's talk about responsible intellectuals, and I'm very obsessed without any hesitation to say that I always impressed with the idea of Shariatis who talk about enlightened intellects. But again, now due to the market demand and the overarching domination of consumerism, universities have become mere factories to produce or to supply manpower to the market and industries. It is not all wrong with that, but the major purpose of a university and its soul must always be preserved, the one that I've mentioned earlier. Now we are facing a greater challenge, the emergence of IR 4.0. I mean, in facing these challenges, I thought universities must prepare itself and the nations, universities must, with adequate human capital to preserve, not the technology, but to preserve humanity and humanistic, the technologies that will dominate on or that are dominating their life. And coming back to your second question, are the universities fulfilling their mission? Yes and no. I hope we are talking about Malaysia in specific. It depends really on the university's leadership and the direction given by the state towards the universities. If the state views universities as only part of any other industries to generate wealth and income, then universities will definitely lose its or their soul and purposes. Same goes with the university leadership. Thank you, Prof. Aslam.
Thank you very much, Dr. Mazli. My apologies, the first thing that I forgot to do was to introduce Dr. Mazli. For those of you who don't know, he was our former Minister of Education, had a very tough job, and I think I mentioned it in the session too, that when there was this webinar or there was a town hall session organized sometime back, I remember there was just a long line of people waiting to ask questions, and it went on and on. It just goes to show how sensitive, education and how important education is, to everybody. And he is the MP for Simpang Renggam in Johor. He had a tough time. And one of the things, if all of you must be following, he has been very active in talking about education and continues to come up with lots of issues and ideas about how to improve our education system. So, and I think he's also the chairman of the Pakatan Harapan Education Committee, if I'm not mistaken. So in that capacity, quite a bit of ideas have been coming from him. So thank you very much. The same question maybe to Terence, or if you want to modify that a bit, please.
Oh, yes, thank you, Aslam. I'd like to build on the points raised by Mazli. I do concur with some of them. The university, as I understand it, and I like to go to its original form, is a place for thinking. It's a place for debates. It's a place where we grapple with real problems and bring intellectuals together to solve these problems through research too. And students who come to the university are privileged. They're privileged to be in this environment where they can read and think and debate ask philosophical questions like the meaning of life, the meaning of education. How can they contribute to a progressive society? How can they promote democracy? How do they participate in decision making about how policies are structured? After all, they are intellectuals. They are supposed to become public intellectuals. They're supposed to serve society. That's my understanding of the university, and that's how I feel we should train our students. It's not about jobs as such. It's about thinking. Having said that, the question then arises, why are Malaysian universities not like this? And here I'd like to put on the table an issue which we have not discussed so far: the role of the state, the nature of the state, not so much the role, but the nature of the state. The nature of the state in Southeast Asia, not just Malaysia, but in developing Southeast Asia, had long been authoritarian. The best examples of this are, of course, Singapore and Malaysia until 2018. And now we are back to an authoritarian system. When you have a state that is authoritarian, do they want a university like this, in this form, a place for people to debate, to think, to nurture students, to venture forth into society and to challenge the thinking of the day, to challenge public policies? James Scott, in a recent book of his, came up with this idea of state think. What he talks about here is there's a need to limit intellectual space. The governments fear the repercussions of their policies if they are questioned. So you must control the universities. You need the universities. You need to produce the manpower to serve the economy and society, but more the economy, not so much society. And so control the student body, control high appointments. Who becomes the vice chancellor or the deputy vice chancellor? Here, what you're seeing is also the state can shape the curriculum. This is very important. And this is why we need to get the government out of the universities. They shape the curriculum. I want to give you one example. Singapore, because we all hold Singapore in very high regard. We are in the top 20 in the world for teaching. Let me give you the example of Singapore. Singapore put a lot of attention in the curriculum on science and technology. They completely negated the humanities and the arts. Why? Because they wanted to industrialize quickly. All the funding went for science and technology. And suddenly, after they industrialized, when they moved more into services and creative technologies, they realized one important thing. Their students can't think. And there was a book written, Can Asians Think? I think they meant, Can Singaporeans Think? The issue here really was this: how do we rectify this so that Singaporeans can think? I'm being very controversial here, I mean very provocative here, sorry. And here, they created the National University of Singapore in collaboration with Yale University, NUS Yale College. Why? To promote liberal arts, something we have been advocating for a long time. Liberal arts education, science, maths, humanities, philosophy, they all go together. And they created this so that they can change the curriculum to create a more thinking, young Singaporean body. And when this young Singaporean body became critical, what did they do last week? They decided to close this institution. They're going to merge it with NUS. I'm saying this to show you how the role of the state, the nature of the state, and how it's shaping our thinking. I just want to close on one more point because I think we need to discuss it. The other issue we need to talk about, and I mentioned it earlier, the economic system. The economic system is very important. In the 1980s, the neoliberal system emerged under Margaret Thatcher, where she converted all the polytechnics to universities, the massification of education. Degrees became a commodity, and we in Malaysia adopted it and implanted it in our public universities, and we allowed the private universities also to play that role. And that's also shaped the thinking of our students. And that's why we have a serious problem today. We have to discuss it. What do we do with our universities? How do we deal with these problems? The economic system, the neoliberal system, and the nature of the state, these two in combination with each other is causing all the problems that we are seeing in the university today, which is doing a great disservice to the young. Let me end here, Aslam.
Okay, thanks, Terence. Well, I'm assuming that the second question, are they fulfilling the mission? You're probably saying no, because of the variety of reasons. But, I think Terence raises a very important point, and already we have Munira in the chat saying, how can we be the soul of the country if we do not uphold academic freedom, AUKU, the 605, and things that we've been hearing for decades. And I think Tan Sri Zul adds to that. How can we have enlightened academics when we have unenlightened politicians driving education? So it's the chat is heating up. Jeff, what are universities for, and are we fulfilling the mission?
Okay. So let me answer just from a general perspective. I have clearly a perspective from England, from the United Kingdom, and of course from here in Malaysia, because I've been here for 20 years now. So, but not so much about the public universities. I can only really talk about the private universities. But even in the United Kingdom, our universities are, well, they're neither public nor private. They are statutorily independent, most of them. So it's a rather different perspective. Excuse me. If we were to ask what are universities for, there is a traditional view, and I have to say that I'm a bit of a traditionalist on these things, so I fully, this is a complete part of my DNA as to what universities are. I agree with what Masli and Terence said, and I think this is not antithetical to what they say, but universities are places for the creation and dissemination of knowledge. That's what we are, that's what we do. And we do this through teaching and learning, which is one pillar. We do it through research and development, which is another pillar. And we do it through collegiality. Internal and external engagement is what Terence was talking about, the concept of public intellectuals and making a contribution to broader society. But in doing all of that, we have to have at our core a very strong and shared view about ethics. And I don't mean morality, I don't necessarily mean religious perspectives, although of course these will condition some of our ethical considerations, but we do need to think about ethics and values, what we stand for, who we stand for, and why we stand for these things, amongst which are the search for truth, the search for tolerance, the search for inclusion, the search to involve other people in an open discussion, whether we agree with them or not, and to do this in a way which is cordial, which is engaging, which is respectful, and which is aimed not in a lazy ad hominem way to criticize the individual because we don't like the person, but to do this in a way where there is a mutuality, an academy, a fellowship in what we do as academics in order for us to go for the main aims, which are to create and disseminate knowledge and to contribute to society more broadly. Now, the question as to whether we are doing this in Malaysia, the answer is, in part, we are doing this, but in a very small part, unfortunately, and certainly the greater part of what we are doing in Malaysia is not to deliver on that mission, unfortunately. And I think, although I'd have very little engagement with the public universities, I think this is true of the public universities as well as the private universities, which is that we just simply don't spend enough time on this idea of creating knowledge. We are spending far too much time on trying to disseminate other people's knowledge, which we do uncritically in many instances. And then when it comes to public discussion and contribution to public discussion, many people, particularly in the private sector, are terrified to contribute to public discussions. And contrary to what Terence says, this is not to say that what he's saying is incorrect, but certainly from the perspective of the private universities, the fear, it doesn't come from the government. We are not afraid of the government. Government doesn't care about us, actually. Government doesn't bother us too much. They're not particularly interested in what we're saying. The fear in the private sector comes from the chancellery, primarily, and also from commercial considerations, where more often than not, the prohibition on academic freedom in the private sector amongst private academics will be that it will harm our commercial prospects, or it will harm our license with the government, which is never true, is never the case. Or it's the S word, sensitive. It's sensitive. You shouldn't touch that topic because it's sensitive. And actually, that's the only type of topic we're really interested in, right? As academics, we want to do this. We want to get involved in this. So there is some pressure from the Chancellery on this, but there is even more pressure, in my experience, not just from the Chancellery, but as I mentioned in the first session, there was a great deal of pressure from our own colleagues not to rock the boat, not to step over the line, not to get involved in what they consider to be sensitive discussions because they feel that it will cause disharmony, or it might lead to the university being brought to attention in a way that they don't want, and then that will have an effect on them. Or more often, they don't agree with our views, but they're not prepared to engage with us on our views. And because the spirit of respectful academic engagement is not being encouraged within the environment. And that means, for me, I think that our students lose out a lot, because whatever we do within the academic community, which is what we should be doing within the academic community, which is to create and discuss good ideas and to do it respectfully and encourage people to understand how we do that and to learn how we do that and what it means to do that. Our students aren't being exposed to that type of learning by example, unfortunately, and that's largely because of an atmosphere that we have created for ourselves, actually. So personally, I don't blame the government for these problems. I blame ourselves for these problems, and that's why I think we need to be more reflective as an academic community, and to ask the question whether we are in fact an academic community or not, whether we are actually prepared to support each other in this common mission.
Thanks, Jeff. Again in the chat, I suppose the comments go again to the fact that universities, like many other things, I think in Malaysia, is this perceived dominance of politics and politicians, yeah? And therefore universities also get caught up in this. We have in the last maybe 15-20 years a lot of talk about autonomy of universities. And many of us in universities, autonomy means just auto, no money. They're just cutting down the money part of it, but everything else maybe remains the same. We have, for example, the creation of a dedicated ministry to look at higher education. Very briefly, it was taken away when Pakatan Harapan came in and Dr. Mazli became the education minister for school as well as universities. But now we have the ministry again. And while there could be certain good things about having a dedicated ministry, it's also led to what some people will say micromanagement of universities. Right, and all these bureaucratic requirements that universities are now needing to do. So because a lot of comments were geared or talked about and aimed at politicians, I think Mazli is the only politician, at least in this panel. So you have the privilege of starting to talk about what do you think, as an academic who became a politician. What are the challenges that you think are faced in our, public, but don't forget we have a very important private university sector, at least for the last 25 years, with the Private Universities Act, passed in the late 90s. What are some of the challenges that you think are faced?
A lot. There's a lot of challenges that we are facing at the moment. Leadership is the most important one, You're talking about those leaders are only there as a result of kowtowing the politicians, hence they were put there, so they will continue kowtowing the regime or the establishment. So what do you hope from them? And mind you, there are also an autocratic leadership in some of the universities. Some of the universities, keras kepala batu, we thought that he's the only person who knows better, he's the Messiah. And he's doing things on his own way without consulting other professors, other faculties. This is part of the issues. And also weak leadership. those are only thinking of the industries and, those consumerism ideas that they have in their mind. So only thinking university as part of that consumerist elements. Academic freedom is one of the greatest challenge that we are facing. That's why, during my time, I had amended 605. I've given it to the Prime Minister then, but I don't know what happened. I brought it to the cabinet and he said that JPA is still scrutinizing it. Yeah, that's what I received. And then the rest is history. When the same Prime Minister who then succeeded me to become the Minister of Education, nothing happened. Should that happen, we should see a very huge change in the landscape of our academic freedom. Censorship, be it self-censorship, or regime censorship and whatever. I mean, this is what's happening in our universities. Yes, I totally agree. I mean, I extremely agree whatever Terence has said. But again, sometimes the problem is not with the state, but also with the academics themselves. I did mention in the chat, we have a lot, not few, a lot of our fellow academics who are trying to kowtow to the regime on the expense of academic freedom, on the expense of even their friendship. Okay. Non-productive intellects. You have intellects who like to make a lot of noise, but they not produce any new knowledge. They're not coming with any new invention. They're not producing any substantive, research. Non-authentic researchers and thinkers. It is part of the challenges that we are facing. Yes, we now produce a lot of researchers, but they're only, let we say, copy and pasting whatever they have absorbed from the internet. And we have thinkers, so-called thinkers, that only imitate what others have thought and parroting them, or the worst, they only think what the regime wanted from them to think. We have a lot of them by a lot of names. Majlis itu, majlis ini, and you can name them. The issues of integrity. I mean, we are facing a very serious issue of integrity. This is why part of my amendment to 605 then was to put integrity as part of it, was to put the issue of plagiarism as part of it. But unfortunately, when I asked the previous government, who's actually the current government, sounds very, very funny, but it only happens in Malaysia because now everybody can become anybody. Okay, so when I asked the minister and the deputy minister, they said they have no intention to pursue the effort to amend 605. The issue of complacency amongst our academics, they feel complacent just only to achieve their KPIs and not going beyond that, not trying to push themselves out of their comfort zone. Lack of innovation, less contribution towards solving society's problems, just like Karen said. We are talking about debating ideas, not only debating ideas, but for what purpose? Not only to enhance people to think, not only to enhance our thinking faculty, but also to solve society's problem, to solve the real problem of the nation, of the world, of the society. But unfortunately, you would find nowadays less academics are interested in these type of issues. For them, as long as they achieve their KPI and then they get promoted to become associate professor and whatnot, and that's the main purpose of their academic journey. And I have to say this, the madness and the crazy running for the ranking game, thus abandoning the real spirit of universities, is the major challenge in our universities in Malaysia, be them the private or be them the public university. Hence the KPIs, hence the plagiarism, hence the integrity issues. It's all because of the craze to get better ranking. I mean, there's nothing wrong with ranking, but not on the expense of integrity, not on the expense of the soul of the universities. And at the end of the day, the real spirit of the university should be, the academic should be innovating and not only imitating. They should be knowledge creators and not only consumers of knowledge. And academics, real academics, enlightened intellectuals should be problem solvers of the nation and not to be problem creators, or worse, to be problem spectators and commentators only. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much. I think you've covered a lot of ground, and I think many of us probably are well aware of these issues. There are external forces, but I think there's also internal, inertia and unwillingness. Yes, we have all these AUKU and 605, but sometimes we also think that even without those things, it may be difficult to get academics to speak out on issues. And I think this has also been something that has been inculcated over the last 20, 30, 40 years. Add to that, there are a few studies that have been done in the area of management that talk about the power distance issue. For those of you who don't know, this is this gap between the upper levels and lower levels of an organization. Malaysia came out number one a few years ago. We never question, or Malaysians are very, very happy to listen to what the bosses say and do it without any question. So this also makes, I think, universities in Malaysia have a major problem with how to deal with commenting and disagreeing.
Professor Islam, may
yes.
I?
Yeah, please.
Now, I was talking about all those efforts that we are trying to do. It has all been recorded in my latest book, but unfortunately it's in Malay, and the English version will come, I think, somewhere in October. Memory book and memoir. We have explained all those things, and few of your names here were mentioned in that book too, as part of the journey of reform of but not yet succeeded reform. Yeah, Terence was there. His name was mentioned too.
Thank you very much. Okay, Terence, you want to add anything to what are some of the problems that we are facing in the university?
I really definitely want to speak on this issue. What are the challenges? First of all, we understand what the university is all about and how we are supposed to train the young to think, to contribute to society. The fact of the matter is education is a fundamental human right. It should be given free of charge. We should not charge a fee for students to go to school, or for that matter, to the universities. Now, we look at other countries, and we tend to put Finland up there. Finland is seen as our model. Finland had similar problems. They changed. Education is free in Finland. They changed the entire curriculum, the way they teach. Only the best become teachers. And it's all provided free of charge to children right up to tertiary level. Here we are talking about Germany. Education is free in Germany too. So if these industrialized economies can provide free education, why not us? The next point, which was raised, leadership issue. I agree, the right leadership matters. Now the question is about a chicken and egg, who appointed who first? The fact of the matter is, look, the vice chancellors are appointed by the government. That is wrong. The vice chancellors should not be appointed by the government. And once they're appointed by the government, if vice chancellors try to be independent, our history shows us, I'll just speak about University of Malaya. Our history shows us that they can be removed. The best example of this was Professor Syed Hussein Alatas. We were happy to see a great philosopher like Syed Hussein Alatas appointed as our vice chancellor. He served only one term. Why? Because he had an independent mind. He did not want the politicians to control the universities. In his final speech, I remember I was graduating at that time for my master's degree. His final speech, he said, make sure the politicians stay out of the university. He was removed because he challenged the system. We must regain that autonomy. Otherwise, this idea about the vice chancellors really are independent and they can act in a certain way, but they're not doing it, is not true. They are being curbed from trying to act. When they show that autonomy, they are removed. That is the reality. And when we have this autonomy, what does it mean? The autonomy means that we have the ability to shape our curriculum. We have the ability to hire and fire staff. we in the university should have our own scheme of service. We should not be under the category of civil servants. We are civil servants, but we are treated like other bureaucrats. We should have our own scheme of service because we are highly specialized, highly trained individuals. And we've been arguing for this specialized scheme of service for academics because then we can do this thing of finding the best people, according them a salary that merits their qualifications, giving the control back to these academics to control research, to control teaching. Now, do we have all this? We don't. So this is the point about this leadership that we really need to get right now. But the government is not allowing for the relinquishing of control. So I'd like to go back to Masli. You know, Masli did a lot in terms of trying to lift all the oppressive laws on us. But I'd like to ask Masli about this point about according that liberty, that autonomy to let the universities themselves decide on their leadership. I want to come to the final part, funding. I raised this point. Why must Malaysia have so many universities? Do we need these 20-odd public universities? We don't have a sufficient manpower base to teach in these universities. So why do we continue to set them up? There have been attempts to close them down or merge them, and there's been a backlash on this too. And it's because we have so liberally created these universities. This is why we're also having a funding problem. And what is the quality of the lecturers and the scholarship and the teaching in many of these universities, the smaller universities? What has been done to address these problems? And isn't it a gross injustice when young people come to us for tutelage that we expose them to people who are ill-equipped to teach? And that is what is happening. But once they get into the system, because they are civil servants, you cannot sack them. So there are all these real structural problems that we need to address if we want to get the universities right. And it goes back to giving us back that independence, which we are not getting. Aslam?
Thanks, Terence. You know, your point about the number of universities is a very interesting point. I remember, you know, at one time we had like 10 universities and we were saying that was probably the number. And then all the college universities were upgraded, you know, to universities. But, you know, I think the one of the ways that it can be, you know, we could try to improve it and connect it to our earlier discussion is to actually talk about TVET. And it, we also mentioned, there are 4 of those 20 universities that are supposed to be technical universities, although maybe again the curriculum that is there may not be what we were talking about. It's not industry led and so on. But that could be one of the ways you actually change some of these universities into technical universities and let industry come in, you know, and I think that was an idea that was being pushed in session 1 and session 2. That is probably maybe something that we may want to consider as we go along. Jeff, do you want to add anything to, you know?
Yes, let me comment from the perspective of the private sector, because I think some of these issues are similar, but of course they're also different because we have a different structure and different aims. First, this issue of politicians. I was Deputy Vice-Chancellor at UniResac, and I went to a Vice-Chancellor's retreat under a previous Higher Education Minister, Khalid Nordin, right? Do you remember him? And he really told us off, actually. He gave us a real telling off. And what he was saying is not dissimilar to what Masli was basically telling us, which was that he had ideas about reforms of the universities, and these ideas were being placed on the table, and they were being stonewalled, basically, not from the politicians, but from the civil servants and from the establishment within the universities, whether they are in the public universities or the private universities. It was not the fault of the politicians. Now, I've known 4 higher education ministers, including Masli and Dr. Noraini, and I think actually that they're really very good people. They're very good. They have ideas. They want to make changes. Dr. Noraini, unfortunately, she hasn't been able to do very much because the moment she was appointed, they basically closed down the universities. But I'm confident, listening to what she has to say, that she has a contribution to make once the universities are reopened. But unfortunately, in all cases, the experience that I've seen is that the ministers come with great ideas and then they are blocked. They are blocked by the civil servants at various forms. They are blocked by what we talk about a great deal, by the grumpy old men who used to be by former vice chancellors, former director general, former deputy director general, something like that. And they simply block it and they just stop it. And they do this in the public sector and they do it in the private sector too. So in my opinion, my experience, which is now over 18 years, it isn't so much the fault of the politicians. Without, I don't want to be disrespectful, but politicians come and politicians go. And they do that in increasing frequency in the recent years, but politicians come and politicians go. And often the politicians simply aren't given an opportunity or the time to be able to initiate excellent ideas, which they come to through engagement and very close stakeholder engagement. They come with really good ideas and they just stop. They're stopped. And I think the civil servants know this because the civil servants know that these reforms take time and they know that often the minister won't be there long enough to see the reforms through that time process. So I'm not as critical as others in terms of politicians, but I am critical. And I think what Dr. Masih said is absolutely correct about leadership. We did research on, you will remember, with Penang Institute on private higher education financing in 2015. And we said at that time that the private universities, there were too many of them, which is an issue that I'll come to just in a moment about the number of universities. And we said that at that time that many of them were insolvent, technically bankrupt, and that this was going to be a problem and it was going to get worse. And lo and behold, here we are. And in fact, we have updated it and it's got worse and worse and worse and worse. Now, the problem is not finance. The problem is management and leadership. It's management failure and it's a failure of leadership. Because the people in the senior positions in these universities have no background in management, no experience in management. They're in a commercial organization. Often they come from public universities into a private university. The environment is completely different. In a public university, they're given a budget, their job is to spend it. In a private university, they have to raise the money in the first place. And they have no capacity to do that. I'm a fellow of the Chartered Management Institute in the UK, Chartered Fellow. And we call this accidental manager. They are accidental managers, these vice chancellors and deputy vice chancellors, presidents, as they like to call themselves, which means that they get into these positions by accident. They come from a background which is completely unrelated to what it is they're being asked to do in senior positions in these organizations. And then lo and behold, the organizations fail. And so it is a failure of leadership and it's a failure of management. And that's a big issue that we are seeing, unfortunately, now because there is a significant crisis. And for the private universities, the crisis is quite acute because we don't have any capacity to fall back on the government for support. In fact, the government hasn't given us anything at all in any of these stimulus packages. Not a single cent has been presented directly for private higher education institutions. Now, because they're companies, they have access to some of the company components of the stimulus plans, but not specifically from an education perspective. And then just finally on this issue about numbers. Terence is pointing out you feel there are too many public universities, and I wouldn't disagree with that. But there are 100, at least, private universities and university colleges, and 300 and something now colleges. 20% of those have folded. 60% apparently of the TVET colleges have closed in this crisis. And many of these colleges have the typical size of these colleges, according to our research, is 1,500 students. This is how small they are. These universities, I mean, I don't mean colleges, I mean universities and university colleges, 1,500 students. They are too small. They are nowhere close to the minimum efficient scale to be called a university, let alone to be called an academic institution. And this is a huge problem. And I think clearly the ministry has a challenge here. They can't close them down because they're private companies. They can't take away their licenses because there are impact externalities to the students. You take away the license of a university, the graduates, the alumni are holding the certificate from an organization that no longer exists, and it's not their fault. So there is clearly a reluctance on the part of the ministry to shut them down. But under the current circumstances, I think it's extremely important that the ministry starts to look at whether these institutions are viable in the long term and whether these institutions should be merged. And by which I mean merged, not just private university merging with a private university, but private universities merging with public universities also. In the systemic approach, because unfortunately we are still talking about public and private. Half of the students are in the private sector and half of the academics are in the private sector. It's not an afterthought, it is a huge part of the entire system. And so we have a systemic problem. And so this idea of structured mergers between various institutions in the public sector and the private sector, in my view, is something that has to be on the table. It would benefit everybody, and particularly it would benefit the students. And that's really who we really care about, actually, in the end. We need to look after the welfare of our students. And at the moment, the students are the last people, unfortunately, that we care about, or the last people that we discuss, and it's wrong.
Okay, thank you very much, Jeff. I think your last comment is actually very nicely moving to the last round of maybe comments from speakers, and that is, what is the way forward? So you're talking about this possible merger or merging of institutions, not only between public universities, but between private and public universities as a potential way forward. And I want to also just, as we go to the last round where we're going to be talking about one or two important reform ideas that you think need to be the priority reforms that are undertaken before we move for us to move forward. Just keep in mind also the discussion about the TVET option that we had in sessions 1 and 2. So maybe Dr. Mazli, one or two things. I know you put a whole lot of things that you were trying to do, but one or two things that we could do, and how would it be done? Because there seems to be knowledge of what are the problems, but a major challenge in getting it done. So I think somebody mentioned in the chat, political will is just not there. So what are your views on that?
Before we get there, can I refer to the questions asked by Terence and also suggestion by Geoff just now, talking about the merge of IPTA, the private and public and public. I'm not sure whether you're aware of the exit plan for education and also long-term plan post-COVID that I presented to the government, and I distributed it on my website. But unfortunately, it's in Bahasa. I'm publishing it soon in English. Part of the long-term solution for higher education, I propose there to be a substantive collaboration amongst the public universities and private universities. I think I've discussed this with Geoff in part of our conversation, and how we could think of turning some of the private universities as, some kind of, I don't want to say part of the existing public universities, but, they have to work together. They have to work together. I mean, this abundance of universities or private universities is not helping at all. That's number one. And number two, you're talking about turning some of them into TVET institutions. Yes, I totally agree with that. And this is very important, not only for the private universities, but also to help the graduates. People are complaining about the higher rate of unemployed graduates produced by our public universities. You know why? Because of the mismatch. We are putting them in 4 years incubator to learn something that is not being demanded by the market, and something that those students themselves are not going to master whatever they've learned, rather than wasting their talents. I think that it's timely for us to shift our ground, to move into TVET, and to put TVET as part of the mainstream. And this is where, during my time, we work closely with Germany and with German Malaysia Chamber of Commerce to look into this and how to help us to produce more skillful manpower to be produced by our TVET institutions and to be directly sent to the industry through the German model of place and train, and not train and place. But unfortunately, after 17 months, when I asked German Malaysia Chamber of Commerce, they said that whatever we have planned have gone into somewhere. But it's not. And talking about the idea of merging public universities, I've tried that. You still remember the idea of merging UNIZA and UMT to become super university. I've tried that, but mind you, Terence, it's not that easy. Political will comes with political implication. You look at the uproar brought by the opposition and brought by everybody. For them, it's something just like you're changing your religion in Malaysia. They couldn't accept that. But, it's not that easy, but the idea must be continued debated, especially amongst our intellectuals. Is it still, rational to have a lot of public universities and private universities, or should we move forward with the idea of merger of universities, just like mentioned by John? I think this issue needs to be thrown to the public, needs to be thrown to the media, to be discussed by academics, by policymakers, and by the deep state. Okay, coming back to Terence's question. Yes, Terence, I totally agree with you, and I have tried. Not that I didn't, I've tried. But again, you pointed out, no, not you, but Geoff pointed out to the very issue of, let we say, challenge that we are facing in Malaysia, the deep state. The deep state wouldn't allow you to do that. You're talking about the appointment of VCs, giving freedom for the universities to fire and hire and whatnot. That can only be done if we amend or if we replace AUKU and 555 with a more comprehensive one that we have tried. It's supposed to be tabled to the cabinet in 2020 and to be brought to the parliament then. But government changed. And when I asked Nuraini in the parliament, she said that the previous government, which is also the current government, has no intention to replace AUKU, to amend AUKU, to whatever. Again, mind you, the deep state. Okay, so yes, we want freedom. A lot of things should be done. But again, coming back to your question, what are the priorities for reform? I would say the first thing to be done is to re-establish Majlis Pendidikan Tinggi Negara, National Council for Higher Education, based on Act 546 to ensure the independency of higher education. But this must not come alone. It comes together with the replacement of AUKU or abolishment of AUKU and 555 with a more comprehensive act that we have planned. And this is part of our demands. Our Education Committee of Pakatan Harapan, this is part of our demand to the new Prime Minister. If they really want to embrace Keluarga Malaysia, whatever they are talking about, this is part of our reform demand. Continue what we have started. Not trying to initiate a new one. We have started. We have initiated it. Just continue it. Number two, to maintain the disconnection between higher education and politics and the domination of political actors, we must put a policy that none of the university board members, the LPU, must be appointed from amongst politicians or political related figures. It must be stated there in the Act, in the policies, anywhere, it must be stated that the university board members must not consist of politicians and political related figures. And for the LPU members, for the board members, their term must be limited to 2 terms only. And we must also re-establish, not re-establish, we must also establish the National Council for Research Integrity. This is very important. Our reputation is at stake. You know, the current exposure of the high number of our academics publishing in predator journals has been talk of the world, and our reputation is in its lowest position. We must improve that, and this is also part of our demand to the Prime Minister. The KPT must establish Jawatankuasa Integriti Penyidikan Kebangsaan, and actually it was proposed by National Science Council since 2007. During my time, for whatever reason, we only have a committee, but it was not a national committee. That integrity committee was led by Prof. Omar from USM. And we were about to push it into National Committee for Research Integrity later, but the rest is history. And also the amendment of Acta 605. The 605 Act for the government now is to continue what we have proposed to the then Prime Minister, and the then Prime Minister has given it to the civil service, JPA, and stopped there. So the current Prime Minister must continue that for the sake of academic freedom and the independency of our higher education from politics. And, you know, student unions must be continued. At the moment, we only have one student union in UIA as a pioneer and one student union in UN. And you could see the difference between these 2 student unions and the rest of student representative bodies in other universities. So they must continue this effort. Students' unions must be established in all universities, and national student union must be established. And finally, make full use of big data, deep analytics, artificial intelligence, and machine learning in higher education. Thank you, Professor.
Thank you very much, Mazli. I think a lot of important issues raised. You know, talking about this, you know, predatory journals. I remember you have this saying, publish or perish. And I think the unfortunate thing in some of our universities, it's not publish or perish. It's actually publish and perish. What you have published is really frightening when you read some of the things that go out there as articles. And also this idea of merging is very important. But, you know, just like once you increase the numbers, it's very difficult to bring it down. I worry about the fact that we now have a 70-person cabinet. You know, is it going to be possible for any future government to actually bring the numbers down? It's going to be an issue. So university is important, but what is that number? And somebody in the chat talked about, has there actually been proper studies done on you know, what we need in different sectors of the economy, and try to, you know, combine with the number of universities and TVET institutions that you've actually established. You know, you would have thought it's something that is being done by the Ministry of Education, Ministry of Human Resource, but I'm not too convinced that there is actually proper planning done in terms of what, you know, how many people we need in this sector, etc. So there's lots of coordination issues that need to be addressed. Terence, we are running short of time, so, you know, yes, reforms, 2 or 3 priorities.
I'll be brief. First, I want to respond to some of the points that Mazli raised. I did read your document which you just released, Mazli, and I want to congratulate you on it. Mazli's document focuses a lot of attention on the suppression of the universities and the need to liberate the universities, and that I concur with. But I do feel that some of the structural problems, especially those exposed post-pandemic, needed more thought, including the use of technology to teach, to e-learning and e-teaching, and how we weave that into the university. At the same time, if we do weave that into the university, what about the experiential learning the best part about being a student in the university is living on campus, participating in university life. That's where you get a real learning that you don't get if you stay at home. And most of the formation that comes for a student is when he is on campus. It's not just about attending lectures, it's also what he does after the lecture hours, the activities that he or she gets involved in, exposure programs especially to expose them to poverty or to injustices in society that you can't get through e-learning or e-teaching. These are issues that we need to grapple with when we talk about what's happening on the ground with the outbreak of the pandemic, where the students can't get onto campus. And how will this shape the way in which we teach, where they lose that experiential learning? On the second issue, which Masli raised, which I want to talk about a bit, is this notion of the deep state. What exactly is this deep state? When Masli became minister here, he gave me an appointment which allowed me to interact, particularly with the bureaucrats. And here I do have some sympathy for what Masli is saying. We focused a lot of attention on the politicians, but there is a very strong bureaucracy also, very entrenched bureaucracy, which I found when I tried to engage with them to bring about the changes, which Masli also said, go ahead and bring about these changes. They were a major stumbling block. Now, what do we do about this? This again comes back to the role of the state. The state conditions the bureaucrats in terms of how to control the universities. It's been so well entrenched now that unless we break this control that they have over the monitoring of the universities, we're going to have a real problem in terms of reforming the universities too. So it's not just about the politicians, it's about the state as a whole that we need to look at. The second issue which I feel we really need to look at is the curriculum, the mindset. Here, mindset, I'm not talking about the children, the young kids. I'm talking about us parents. What mindset do parents have when they send their children to the university? It's a very utilitarian approach to understanding what education is about. You go to university to get a degree. It's not about getting an education. It's not about getting them to think about their role in society as public intellectuals. It's about getting the degree so that they can get a job, so that they have social mobility. And the more degrees you have, the more social mobility you get. Now, this is something we really need to break. And that's why I like the system where we have those who are inclined towards academic thinking, go to the universities. The technical training is a different kind of training. We give them a different kind of skills. These points, I agree again with Masli on this media, the role of the media to discuss these issues about the role of the state, about the kind of mindsets that we parents also have that need to be changed and need to be debated. As much as there's a lot of criticisms about the universities, by society, do society also have a mindset that also needs to be changed? And I would say, yes, it needs to be changed. They need to understand it's going to university is not about getting a job. It's about getting an understanding of your role in society. And if you are an intellectual who has made it to the university, and the university shouldn't be for everyone, you've made it to the university, then you start thinking about this. You're privileged to be there. Those who are more technically inclined go to the technical institutes. Those who are more inclined towards the arts, entertainment, that's a good thing too. Why can't we have a system that trains them in those areas? I want to come to the next issue, the universities itself. This is important because in Malaysia, we created 5 research universities. And that distinction between research universities and the teaching universities is just not appreciated. When they created the 5 research universities, they told these 5 universities, you focus on research because you have a role to play in pushing forth R&D, research and development, and linking with industry and transferring that research into industry to bring about a form of development that is also equitable. They also have to contribute to innovation. But that's not how it's going. And in fact, the research university should get more funding because research is costly. And we're not seeing the research coming from industries. Why? Because 98% of our corporate sectors are SMEs. They have no money for R&D. They're reluctant to invest in R&D because it's too risky. So the research university should play that role of doing that kind of research to bring about the kind of development. And for that too, we need the right kind of students. And here, I'm going to stress students, and I really must stress this. When we teach in English. I am shocked at the quality, the command of English language by our students. If you read the reading list, it's all in English. And the command of the students of the English language is so poor. I'm wondering, how are they coping? I'm raising these points because these are real issues. If the students come to university to read and they can't read, then what education are they getting? So there's a lot of reforms that we need to look at, which go beyond the universities. It goes down to the basic primary education and the quality of teaching there too. So we need to do a lot of changes if we want to get our education system back on track. Let me end here. I know we are running out of time. Aslam, back to you.
Okay, thank you, Terence. Very quickly, just pointing out some of the comments. Raghunath talks about, why the big number of medical schools, and that created this problem of now, doctors that can't get permanent jobs. The ranking game has been discussed quite a bit. I know Tan Sri Zul is very much against ranking, and so Muhammad Irshad Zaini is saying, well, there is maybe some role for ranking to be played there. Prof. Saadia talks about the role of universities to promote critical thinking, which is something that we didn't talk maybe sufficiently. We talk about monetary benefits, becoming too important. In the not only in the university but also in some of the boards. I don't know whether actually board members get any monetary benefit, but if they do, then well, that's something to talk about. And then we also have again the issue of politics and politicians. David Das mentioning this. We have a comment also about free tertiary education, something that we didn't talk at all about here, whether it should be free or there should be some charge, and if there is, how do you talk about this? And then I suppose the funding, the PTPTN. I think in the earlier session there was a comment about not enough money is given for students to take education in TVET institutions compared to maybe in the public universities. But then if you follow Daniel's model, let the industry pay for this, right? So you wouldn't have to spend money on giving students money to attend TVET university. So that would be one way to resolve it. And then we also have somebody asked Jayanath, who is the patron of the deep states? Very interesting question. And then Orang Asli, education for all. So how do you bring all levels of society into university? So quite a number. Jeff, you have your couple of minutes on what you think should be done.
Okay, I will try to keep it short because I think there might be some questions we might want to cover. I want to talk about PTPTN because we were asked to do some research by PTPTN on the issue of reform of PTPTN. And our research shows that PTPTN is really one of the central problems for the system as a whole. We know that the research done by PTPTN itself, one cycle was very open and honest about this, was demonstrating that PTPTN was unstable, unsustainable, and that there was a need for reform. But we found that actually reliance on the loan system is damaging for private universities, because it has a distortionary effect in terms of what they can charge in terms of their prices, actually, strangely. The prices for the private universities are actually in part restricted by the availability of the loan that the students are able to pay. And so the PTPTN has an effect of keeping down the prices. So it actually has a systemic problem. It causes a systemic problem. And our recommendations began to sketch out an idea of simply removing it, simply abolishing it as the primary form of higher education finance in Malaysia, because it was never designed for mass higher education finance. It was always designed for small. When it was introduced in the 1996-97, it was designed for small numbers of students. It was never designed for the very large numbers of students that we have now. And that's why it's become very unsustainable. And it's particularly unsustainable, of course, for the students. So I want to have a shout out for the students because we really need to engage with our students. And I agree with Masli about student unions. I mean, as a former student politician, I know very well the role that I played at my university, at the University of East Anglia in Norwich, where Aslam and I are both graduates from there. I was a representative on the Senate and the Council and the Student Affairs Committee, actively involved in the governance of the university. And they did, from time to time, change policies and take what we had to say into account. And I think that our students must be involved in the governance of our universities. And we must reach out and ask them very much what they want. They are, after all, the largest stakeholder group. And we can't ignore the needs of the largest stakeholder group. And now let me just make a final shout out to the second largest stakeholder group, which are the faculty, faculty and staff, actually. And the pay and conditions of academics in Malaysia is frankly disgraceful. And certainly in the private sector, it's disgraceful. Academics are being asked to pay to take pay cuts during this crisis. They're being asked to take on extra teaching. The conditions of tenure are increasingly tenuous. It's becoming very much more informal. We are members of the precariat, actually. We are not actually considered as a profession in many respects. And I think that we really need to get together on that as academics to present our case for why we should be treated better. Because unless you treat academics well, that will have an effect on the quality of the institution, the quality of the teaching, and the quality of the overall system. And at the root of this problem, in my view, is disempowerment of academics. And that's it's our own fault, because we don't have the unity and the solidarity to come together to make our case to the ministers and the vice chancellors and the civil servants so that we get better terms and conditions of employment.
Thank you very much, Jeff. We've been going at it for almost 4 hours. And I think, earlier on, I saw 160 participants, and we still have 143 with us at the end. I mean, that I think says a lot for the fact that I think we are all very concerned about the topic of, education. Are universities worth it? I'm just wondering at the end of 4 hours, what our answer will be. I don't know what the answer is. Maybe we'll have some closing comments later. Where do we start? We talked about, we looked specifically at moving forward in TVET. And I think the first 2 sessions were focusing on that. And in this session, we tried to give a wider look and to try and connect TVET discourse within universities as a whole. And that brought in a lot of, some of them are old stories. I think, for those of us who have been involved with Academic Staff Association and discussions, I think we've heard many of these issues for a long time. And I go back to my point. I think, in Malaysia, we have a private and public divide. And I think this public and private divide cuts across many, many aspects, including education. We have not talked about the ethnic issue in Malaysian universities. I think it's a very, very, very important issue. The public and private divide is also made more complicated with the ethnic divide. Yeah, and I think that's something that has to be given attention to. I do also think that there is an increasing divide along economic lines. I think there was a study done by the Ministry of, I'm not sure whether it was during Mazli's time or before him, that said that about 55 or 60% of students in public universities are actually coming from B40 families, right? So public universities are, also seeing, a huge, population coming from lower income levels. So that brings a very different dimension to universities, right? And how do we overcome that? Gender has been another issue, but we've not addressed it. Yeah, the huge numbers of students that come to public universities are female students, and that is after we actually have a higher entry requirement. I don't know whether I'm telling something which is a secret, which shouldn't be told, but we do, right? but that can be in a way balanced by the TVET, right? We could actually compensate, because many of the male students, well, we don't know what male students do in schools. Apparently, they have the same classes, and yet they're busy drawing photos or something like that in answers, and so they could be the ones that go into the TVET side, because they may be geared towards it. I don't know. Again, we need more studies on this. These are so many issues that have to be tackled, and unfortunately we don't have enough time. One thing that I do know is that from the comments made, it really, I think, requires CAS to think about more sessions in this area. I think it's really an area that gets people interested. There are many views, and maybe the people that we've not brought in this time, which we should think of, are actually people from the Ministry of Education, who could then share maybe their own issues. I know it's just not possible to bring everybody in, but that maybe requires another session that we have to do in the future. It's coming up to about 1 p.m. and it is a Sunday. And I think with that, I would take this opportunity to thank our panelists, Mazli, Terence and Jeff, and for all the people who were involved with the chat. Maybe I just want to end by just quoting Monira's comment. Power distance is a wonderfully sounding term, but bring it to the Malaysian context, it's feudalism. So we need to maybe make a change, in universities, to get this out of our system, where we do think of universities as a place where there can be healthy debate, discussion, disagreements, and we have to start probably with academics, willing to disagree and debate. So with that, I thank everyone again, and now I think we are in the final closing comments, and I think Prof. Fauzan, are you with us? And
Yes.
Okay, so the session is now transferred over to you.
Thank you very much, Prof. Aslam. Well, we have a good discussion today, even it's a Sunday, but it's like working days, everybody here, and we are sustained to 137. The most is more than 160 today. Thank you very much, Konrad-Adenauer-Stiftung and Fischer Malaysia, and especially our invited speakers, Wabi Nurul Izzah, Wabi Mazli Malik, Dr. Mazli Malik, Prof. Terence, Prof. Jeffrey, Prof. Aslam also, as speaker, moderator, plus everything. And our youth leadership, Jufitri Johar from the Majlis Belia Malaysia, our future leaders, Dasvindran Patrivan, and Sister Nur Rabiatul-Adawiyah. Alhamdulillah, all praise to Allah Ta'ala, we managed to have this program, and know for sure that we're going to have another one. And as Prof. Aslam suggests, we should bring the Ministry of Education. We talk a lot about them, but we should, I think, to be fair with that, we should bring them along. And also, I got the feedback that we should invite the industry, not just Daniel. I forget to mention you, Daniel, but you are part of our systems, and thank you very much. And I want to quote Professor Almarhum, Professor Dr. Siddiq Fadil. My mentor, Murabi, my teacher, just passed away last week. This week, sorry. He said, the education is our responsibility. We have to do it. And we have to be patient. He repeat patient and patient. It will take 10 years, 20 years, who knows? But we have to do it. Together, all of us, be government, be politician, be academician, be industry, be the private or public sectors. And I hope we not just become a talk show or buzzer talk. We need to have an action. I like what YB Mazli Malik said. We have to change the act, but we have to act together. So the politicians, the citizens, the voters, we have heard a lot about the spoiler, the politicians, the deep state, the colonizer, and the university's autonomy. But this is just term if we don't do anything. So We need to do something, and now is time for us to act. The way forward is to act, not just to talk. And I really want to quote Professor Harry Lewis from this former dean Harvard College. He described that university has lost its education's mission. How education designed to educate responsible human being and citizen, yet now is evolved to virtual quote-unquote cafeteria model, offering a diverse menu of disjointed option, completely lacking any intellectual integrity. We come up with, we have this university but lost excellence without soul. So I want to conclude that I'm a professor in IT, but I really promote hardware, digital technology, name it, artificial intelligence, machine language, or big data analytics. But we have to focus on our hardware, our inner strength, our hardware in our peopleware, because the hardware, the one that determine our peopleware, then peopleware will the one who develop and create the hardware and software. So we have to come to the basic. We just not have high tech, but we should have high touch. With that, I will close with this conference. And Miriam, Fischer, I think you remind me that we should fill up the questionnaire for the organizer to make it better, of course, to improve. The biggest room in the world is the room for improvement. And I know there is elephants in the room. So they are said it's a singular elephant or plural elephants. So, but obviously there are elephants, a big one, obvious one, but how to get rid of it? So, wabillahi taufiq wa hidayah. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. I'll pass back to Prof. Aslam or Miriam want to say anything as a moderator. No, thank you. So yeah,
I
Miriam.
don't think there's anything to ask.
Yeah,
thank you all again, also from our side of CAS. I really appreciate this discussion, and you're absolutely right. There's no value in this unless we actually proceed. No? We have said it all, we know it all now, and we have to find ways to proceed. So again, also from our side, thanks again, and have a lovely Sunday, everyone, for now.
Thank you.
And
Okay, thank you, Miriam. Thank you.
Auf Wiedersehen.
Auf Wiedersehen.